And for invocation, we have Commissioner Brian Helms.
If you're so inclined, please bow your head in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we want to thank you for this day, Lord. We want to thank you for the opportunity to come here tonight and gather and do the business of the county. Lord, we ask for your wisdom and your guidance as we make decisions for the people of Union County. Lord, as we celebrated Mother's Day yesterday, Lord, I want to thank you for all the mothers, all of those ladies that have given of themselves to raise the next generation. And Lord, we are fortunate to have them. And Lord, I also want to thank you, Lord, for the ones that have passed. As we have celebrated our living mothers yesterday, Lord, let's not forget about the ones that have passed. Lord, again, we want to thank you for all of your blessings and ask that you be with us during this meeting. Thank you. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, next we have informal comments. I believe we have two people that are registered to speak. The first is Jordan Garrick, and just if you'll come forward and state your name again and where you're from. Is Jordan here? Okay. See, she's Miss Piedmont. Is that? Okay, next we have Matthew Smith. Matthew here? Oh, not the Matthew Smith.
If that makes me the Matthew Smith, I guess that's me then. Good evening.
How are you?
I'll just give you one. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Thank you for allowing me this time, and thank you for what you do. My name is Matt Smith, and I am a lifelong resident of Union County, currently living with my family just outside the Unionville area. I'm here on behalf of the citizens who were approved in 2022 for the Short Water Line Extension Program. We live in rural Union County where quality of water is extremely poor. Our home has 40 times the allowable limit of arsenic as well as other major contaminants. Our water is toxic without the use of a $5,000 filtration system that only has a 10-year lifespan. Even with this filter, we still drink bottled water. We do not have sewer in our part of the county and hopefully never will. We don't want it. With sewer comes population density, and we prefer living in the country. We have county water literally surrounding us. I am part of a community that lives on a 1-mile stretch of Lawyers Road without county water. There's water on every part of our road and every single road around us. You can't imagine how frustrating it is that the brand new Yadkin River water treatment plant is less than a mile from our home. The water main runs less than half a mile from our home, the construction of which disrupted our lives for 2 years, and we gain exactly zero benefit from it. It's like the ancient mariner said, there's water everywhere and not a drop to drink. Since the end of 2021, Union County has either been given or allocated over $40 million in state and federal funds solely to improve our water infrastructure. Citizens on our road have been petitioning for county for water since 2012. Pursuant to the county's requirements, my neighbor and I were able to get nearly all the residents of our road to agree to apply for the new short line program in 2021 and pay the considerable fees associated with it. To our great relief, the Board of County Commissioners approved our application in early 2022. We were required by the county to pay our portion of the construction costs, which we all did. The county told us that our water line would be completed within 12 to 24 months. This was true for many citizens across rural Union County. From the numbers provided by the county, I calculate we all have paid over $250,000 to the county, money which Union County has been holding now for nearly a year. We have honored our part of the contract, but are still waiting on Union County to do the same. At the board meeting on January 17th of this year, our new manager, Mr. Brian Matthews, specifically addressed this issue and told the board that our project should be completed. He said, and I quote, "It would be awfully hard to go back on. We already designed it, and we've got all that ready to go. It would be difficult to tell those future customers that we are not going to do it." Since that meeting, all of the county's $16 million cash on hand was allocated to the Crooked Creek project, whose purpose is to provide additional sewer capacity to new businesses and new multifamily dwellings in Indian Trail. Our project costs a fraction of that. All we want is the county to honor its promise to us and to be treated at least as partially well as the new residents of Western Union County. Please provide us with safe drinking water. We add no sewer burden to the system. The only thing we add is additional rate-paying customers. On behalf of my family and my fellow citizens of rural Union County, we respectfully request this board return funding to our project. I want to thank you very much for your time and consideration and the hard work that this board does do. And I'd like to say a special thank you to Ms. Alina Young, who is the project manager for the Short Water Line Extension Program, who has spent an unbelievable amount of time working for us and just answering my many, many emails over the last several months. Again, members of the board, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you. And
very
Mr.
much.
Smith, if you'll stay, we are going to be addressing some of this later on in the meeting. So if you're available to stay. And also, we created a committee that you would be very good on to help future residents as well with these programs. If you'd like to volunteer for, we'd love to have you.
Okay.
I think Lynn has applications on the county website for the water extension program to people who don't have water.
Right.
But we are going to be addressing the funding sources for projects like yours tonight.
I think that's one of your action items near the end of the meeting tonight. Is that right?
We have an update with the budget and
Right.
and funding and giving staff direction on how to fund those projects.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And I'm just thinking you're Miss Piedmont.
Yes, that's me.
We've been waiting on you.
I can't be
We
Ms. Piedmont.
started at 6, but we waited on you. So if you'd like to come up and introduce yourself, and we'd love to have you up here.
Well, thank you for your patience. I have to apologize for the Charlotte traffic coming from uptown. But hello, good evening. My name is Jordan Garrick, and I am the 2023 Miss Piedmont for the state of North Carolina. I'm a part of the Miss America organization, which is the largest provider of scholarships to young women across the world. I will be competing for the title of Miss North Carolina in June of 2023 in High Point, North Carolina. So excited to represent the Piedmont region and Union County specifically in High Point this summer. The why Union County and why am I before you all today? It's because I'm a local native of Weddington, North Carolina. I grew up here, graduated from Weddington High School, eventually went on to graduate from UNC Chapel Hill, and now I'm back as a permanent resident, and I love Union County. So when Miss Lynn West provided me the opportunity to speak today, I couldn't say no, because truly I've been afforded so many opportunities through this county and wanted to, one, say thank you and present myself as a community representative to get involved in any other activities or events that are happening in the Union County area as a lifelong resident, I guess I can call myself now. As Miss Piedmont for my reign, I was selected in February of 2023, so just a couple of months ago, but I've spent my time specifically advocating for technology and technology education within our youth communities. So what does that look like? I specifically work in artificial intelligence for Deloitte in Uptown Charlotte, and I've been using my time and my platform as Miss Piedmont to talk to students about what do careers in technology look like? How can we solve some of our challenges right here in Union County with technology, with AI? How do we be explorative and creative problem solvers to solve our community's greatest challenges? So I won't take up too much of your time, and I see I have about a minute left, but it's truly an honor to be here before you, speak to you all, and thank you for your patience.
Well, usually we get a picture with beauty queens. So
Yes, I would love a picture.
I was very excited when I thought you were Miss Piedmont High School, but
No, I'm not Miss Piedmont High School. I'm the entire region. So hopefully
you're
that's
a
still
bigger region.
Hopefully it's
they
a
got
good
you from a bigger
consolation.
pool than Piedmont High School. Well, you'd have been very good as Miss Piedmont High School too.
Oh,
So
thank
with the
you.
other commissioners, can we all go down and get a picture with her? And I'm sure that helps you with your title reign.
Yes, it does. And do you all consent to being on Instagram?
Okay.
Okay.
Good with that? Let's all walk down front and get a picture with Miss Piedmont.
Yes, absolutely. Here, let me get my phone.
I do, yeah.
And then I was looking at graduate film. Chapel Hill.
Yeah, we'll keep you.
And where's his son?
She's hiding.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Chairman, if you want to step in just a teeny bit. There you go. Okay. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I'll get a couple more. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Looks great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so you understand. Thank you.
For all of you prospective candidates in the future, never miss a chance to get a picture with a beauty queen. Okay. So that's the only 2 that we had signed up. Anybody miss signing up? Okay. Next, we have the public, we don't have a public hearing, staff recognition, service award recognition. Looking for Julie. You didn't know you were going to have to follow the beauty queen, right?
I know, that's a tough act to follow, for sure. Somebody's got to do it, though, right? Good evening, Commissioners. Just a very short intro to our service award video. We had our second quarter Employee Service Award Program ceremony on May 3rd. And this was recognizing employees that are meeting milestones in April, May, and June in our service award program. We actually had 23 employees that were recognized. Specifically, we had 12 5-year recipients, 4 10-year recipients, 4 15-year recipients, 1 20-year recipient, and 2 25-year recipients. And these ceremonies provide an opportunity for us to honor and highlight these individuals and thank them for their service to Union County. For anyone that has attended one of these ceremonies, they are truly special events. And for those that are not able to attend, we are grateful to have the videos capture these recognition moments that really matter for our employees. We hope you enjoyed the video. Help us thank these employees for their service. And we hope that you enjoy hearing from some of these employees personally about their experiences while working with Union County. Thank you.
For our Q2 Service Award meeting today. This is for April, May, and June Service Award recipients for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20, and then we've got a 25-year. We have a packed house. We've got a lot of people coming in to support everyone, which is exciting and awesome to see that.
When I started with the county, I had moved over from the schools, and at 6 months I decided this is where I wanted to be because it felt like a nice family environment. And it means a lot to have these awards and honor people that's been here this long. For 25 years for me, I'm one of the old people. I was one of the young people at one time, but I'd see the county changing, the face of it. When I walk in the building, I don't know a lot of people. But that's a good thing because the next generation is taking over.
Glad to have you. Brian, I'm proud to call you my friend. Congratulations. Thank you. After
the water changes, I have 15.5 years working out in operations, and in that time I've seen water and sewer merge together, the new operations center being built, and then going on into new development, watching all the new development and new subdivisions being built, and watching the people come in and raise the county.
I can't wait to see where she goes from here. Thank you. Here's to many, many more.
I think it's great to show that we're appreciated as employees and that what we do matters. So knowing that we've been here 5, 10, 15, 25 on years, and having our direct supervisor kind of acknowledge everything that we've done in a ceremony like this is kind of just a way to prove that what we're doing matters and what we're doing is important. Thank you.
Derek, I appreciate all you do. Thanks, sir.
I guess when I came with the public sector, I see the need to take that experience that I have to help people out. You know, building a house is a big thing. So I try to, first of all, make sure the house is done right by contractors, and also get the people and the service they need and the comfort they need, because it is a stressful situation.
No other programs can come and get Stacy. Thank you.
So, Jim, appreciate 15 years.
These 15 years are the second half of my nursing career. The first half, I've worked in different hospitals, different organizations, and had a lot of different experiences. Coming to Union County and public health, I was so impressed by the work that was being done and the people that I began working with. Nowhere else that I had worked as a nurse were there so many people with a heart so dedicated to what they were doing and wanting to help people.
Thank you so much for everyone coming out. What a great turnout today. It's a packed house. And I want to say thank you to all the supervisors, all the co-workers, everyone for coming here to support your co-workers, to celebrate them for what they've accomplished here. I'm going to say this like a broken record. You are what make Union County a great place to work. It's you, it's the staff. And I try to let our board know that your employees are the greatest asset that you have. And I can't do my job, a management team can't do their job without all of your support. I can listen to all the stories and the comments that you make. There's a theme, and the theme is about teamwork, it's about dedication, it's about all of the good things you do in Union County. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for all you do for Union County. Thank you very much, I appreciate it.
And let's give all those employees a round of applause. Okay, next we have consent agenda. Anybody want to make a motion on the consent agenda, or anybody want to pull anything off the consent agenda?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I would request that we move item 23-240 off of consent for discussion, please.
Okay, what page is that on?
That would be page 9, I believe, sir.
Yes, that's page 9. That's contract and budget amendment, opioid abatement funding from Partners Behavioral Health Management.
Let's see. Okay. 23-240. We'll add that to the big. Let's see. Set that to the very last thing before county manager's comments. 23-240. Okay. Anybody want to make any other movements, or anybody want to make a motion on the consent agenda as amended?
Motion to approve as amended.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Okay, next we go to business. Start page 20, or 19 or 20. 23-248, initiate Waxhaw Parkway compensative transportation plan, comprehensive, sorry about that. That's Bjorn.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Manager Matthews. This is an agenda item that has already gone before the towns of Mineral Springs and Waxhaw, where they have approved this process. What it is an amendment to the alignment for a portion of the Waxhaw Parkway in the Comprehensive Transportation Plan. These are plans that are required by the state of North Carolina. They are administered by the transportation planning organizations, in this instance, the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization. The adoption process is actually through CARTPO and the NCDOT. And while it doesn't automatically mean that the project is funded, it is used to start the funding process. And we use it literally every day to help provide input on future projects, as well as reviewing site plans for consistency with the plan, especially rezonings, and for candidate projects through the project solicitation process that we're actually going through right now. It does not include intersection scale improvements, which is why later this summer you'll see the critical intersection program list of intersections. These are meant for corridor widenings and new locations. And like I said just before, we use it for reviewing rezonings to request dedications of land along new roads or existing roads that are intended to be improved, as well as for bridge replacements that occur all the time, and for reviewing potential projects to submit for funding through the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization or the NCDOT. Now, the specific amendment is on the northeast part of Waxhaw, but this amendment triggers a modification on the south side of NC 75 that I'll get to in a couple slides. The existing alignment is what's shown in brown, goes over to nearly Collins Road, and based on a 2022 feasibility study that was initiated by the NCDOT, they recommended shifting the alignment closer into Waxhaw. And so this affects Waxhaw, which is what's in gold, as well as Mineral Springs, which is in the pink, and then the white area, which is unincorporated Union County. And all property owners buffering off of these two alignments would be notified as a part of the process, as well as the municipalities, who are obviously a part of this amendment process. The new alignment that we specifically received is what was shown in gray. This is what the consultants provided, which was a corridor. And all we did was choose the center line of the corridor. We can't adopt a multiple 100-foot wide corridor as our alignment. We have to choose a specific route. And so we just center lined off of the route. And you see this hook on the bottom of the corridor on 75, because there'd be a bridge over 75 that would then connect into it, similar to MLK at 75, just west of Monroe. And it includes a cost estimate. That was part of the reason why NCDOT initiated this. It's approximately $72 million. And this will not be the ultimate alignment when it actually is funded. And I'll get to that in a subsequent slide that'll show that we have impacted a lot of property owners over the last 30 years as we've tried to get a bypass to Waxhaw built. And so all this does is serve as a starting point for the design process when the project is funded, and we don't know when that will be. So the second amendment that would be triggered by this is to take it south of NC 75 and connect back into Old Providence, south of Waxhaw. You can see that the vision is for a continuous corridor connecting all the way south of Waxhaw. Waxhaw, Mineral Springs, Union County, NCDOT want that to continue, so there'd be an amendment that's shown in the lime green that would connect back up as soon as possible to keep that alignment south to connect into Old Providence. So the historic perspective from 1992, when the first bypass of Waxhaw was proposed, to today shows that there have been multiple alignments. And the goal has always been to get around Waxhaw from the north to the south, but it has changed over time. And so just to have some perspective on the idea of the finality of this alignment that we're choosing now, it's not the final alignment either. But we how we actually use it, what you'll see in some plats has changed over time as well, because case law has deemed the assignment of the corridors in plats, having the land either set aside or reserved, has been deemed a taking. And so the DOT lost a $1 billion lawsuit just a few years ago related to loop projects such as the Shelby Bypass or 485 or other similar roads. The biggest one was near Winston-Salem. And so all we can do is request dedication of land, but we can't require it. And so that has changed how we designate these in our plats, and I'm going to get to that in a second. This is an example that was affected off of Snow White Trail. This text that you can't really read, it shows that this is the approximate location and alignment of the Waxhaw Thoroughfare Plan, of the Waxhaw Parkway from the Thoroughfare Plan dated December of 1997. So the plan was actually adopted in 1998. So this shows that they had it dedicated or set aside as a part of this plat. Then you look at a later one, which is just to the west of it, and they don't reference it. And the reason why is because this was from 18 years later, and the alignment has shifted to the east. Therefore, they didn't have to show it. So the previous people included it in their plans, and by the time they got onto subsequent subdivisions of land, it had been amended. So that's unfortunate that that had happened, and it affected property owners. Similarly, on the south side, the segment going all the way down south of Waxhaw, we had a subdivision that Union County processed that has a section of their road, Old Stone Forest, where the road is designated as the future Waxhaw Parkway. It's a wider cross-section, has more asphalt, and it was stubbed out to be the future Waxhaw Parkway. It's no longer the preferred alignment. It's slightly to the east of there. So this is another example of additional right-of-way, additional asphalt that was required, and is, as of right now, not going to be used as the Waxhaw Parkway. So the process that we propose going through is here right now in the month of May, all 3 local jurisdictions are being asked to approve resolutions initiating the process. Waxhaw and Mineral Springs have approved it. You're being asked to tonight. We would then work through the CARTPO process to get this onto the TCC and board agendas for information in June with action in July. So roughly 2 months from now, we would start the public comment process and receive comments from people throughout the county. Anyone can comment, but the property owners affected by this would specifically be contacted. We would process that comment, those comments, and then in September, consider approving some sort of resolution, either affirming the existing corridor because maybe the comments were really, really negative against the change, or if the decision is to go with the proposed new alignment, to recommend that as the amendment, take that to CARTPO. CARTPO would then take action in November, according to the schedule. And then after, some months after that, it would go on to the NCDOT's Board of Transportation agenda for approval. So within 12 months from now, it would be amended if this schedule was followed. So the requested action is to direct staff to work with Mineral Springs and Waxhaw to initiate the CTP amendment process through CARTPO. And the next time you'll really see this, if this is approved, is when we go out for public comment later in July. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have or go back to any previous slides.
Anyone have any questions? All right, thank you, Bjorn. You don't need any action from us tonight.
No, you have a resolution to approve the initiation of the process.
Okay. Anybody want to make a motion on that, or do we?
Bjorn, if I can ask a question. So you mentioned, well, you touched on some of the impact to the homeowners over the past 30 years or so. This current plan, do we have any kind of idea about how many additional homes may be impacted with this?
You mean going from the orange to the purple alignment?
Correct. Yes, sir.
It's fewer. That's off the top of my head. That's the answer. That's the reason why it was shifted, from the orange to the purple alignment. It's not many in either instance. I want to say on the order of 10, but it's fewer than it was under the current alignment.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Does the motion need to be in a particularly explicit form, or can I just move that we work with Waxhaw and Mineral Springs to send a CTP amendment to CARPA?
That's essentially what we're asking for.
All right,
Yes,
well,
sir.
I will so move.
Any discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Thank you.
Everybody voted correct, right? Okay.
Commissioners, you do have a resolution in your packet if you should choose to approve that.
Did we not already just do that?
I didn't hear the resolution explicitly mentioned.
Well, I didn't.
I think that's what it
that was
says.
my question, if it needed to be verbatim or if I could have just.
Yeah, no, you do not have to recite the resolution verbatim, but just referring to it should be
Okay.
fine.
Okay, so we're good, right?
Should be. He
You
did
good?
refer, he did, Bjorn said it, and that was, he said his motion was to approve the resolution.
Okay. All right, next we have ARPA funding overview, recommendations from Clayton.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm going to be talking to you tonight about ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funding. And while you will be seeing some recommendations as part of this presentation, there we go. We're not going to be asking you to take any action tonight. I'm going to give a high-level overview of ARPA and then get into a timeline of the actions that the board has taken with respect to this funding, our current status of spending on the projects, and then the recommendations. So the American Rescue Plan Act was signed into law March 11th, 2021. It was effective March 3rd of that year. And among all the programs that were established with ARPA, the one I'm going to be talking about is the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund Program. And that was designed to provide support to states, territories, local governments in responding to the economic and public health impacts of COVID-19. Union County received a little over $46.5 billion, and it is administered by the U.S. Department of Treasury, and that's who we send our quarterly reports to. There are several eligible use categories. These are categories where funds can be expended for ARPA and on what projects they can be expended on. And so there are four main categories. The first one is responding to COVID-19 or its negative economic impacts. The second one is responding to workers performing essential work during COVID-19 through premium pay. Premium pay is not an eligible use after April 10th, 2023, because that was when the federal government terminated the declaration of national emergency with respect to COVID-19. So that's no longer an eligible use. The third one is provide government services to the extent of reduction in revenue due to COVID-19. Treasury came back and had some clarification about that. And essentially, every jurisdiction could claim a reduction in revenue of up to $10 million, regardless of whether an actual reduction was realized. So if you didn't realize any reduction in revenue, or $2 million or $5 million, as long as your allocation was up to $10 million, you could take that $10 million as like a standard allowance. And then the fourth one was making investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. One thing I want to point out is that there are enumerated uses under each category. And enumerated uses are eligible uses of funds specifically called out in the final rule from Treasury. So if you can't point to an enumerated use to determine eligibility for a project, there are a number of steps you have to take, including a written justification that has to be submitted to Treasury in order for that project to be deemed eligible. So that was the approach that has been taken in Union County, was to look at those enumerated uses to ensure that we are actually have eligible projects. There are some prohibited uses, pension funds, borrowing money, making debt service payments, rainy day funds, or other financial reserves, or satisfying obligations from a legal judgment or other legal action. I'm not going to go into all of these, but these are the award terms and conditions. Essentially, these are the strings that are attached, and I'm not even getting to all of them. These are just the major ones. So when we signed that award letter accepting these funds, we agreed to comply with these as part of receiving them. Getting into a timeline of actions, in 2021, in June, the board approved accepting the first tranche of ARPA funds, which was roughly half of the $46.5 million. At that time, staff also gave some information about a work group that we would be putting together to gain feedback from the community. And that was highly encouraged by the U.S. Treasury. Then in August, the board received a presentation from the UNC School of Government about ARPA funds in more detail, as well as a presentation from that Recovery Act Committee, that staff-led work group, on their guiding principles, as well as some broad recommendations about how they thought the funds should be spent. Then in November, the board received staff recommendations for general funding allocations. This was designed to help staff come back to the board with specific projects and amounts, and be able to essentially come back with some specific recommendations so you give us some broad guidance. And so the board then approved at a later meeting the funding allocations, and you can see those here. First quarter of 2022, I'm looking at calendar year here when I'm referring to quarterly. February, the board approved staff recommendations for specific project funding allocations as follows. And a couple things I want to point out is a couple of projects, the whole body security scanning for the Sheriff's Office and the online COVID-19 screening with HR, we were able to actually find other funding sources to fund those, so we removed those projects. And then the Southwest Regional Library, as well as the Public Records Request Management System, was later moved to an ARPA-enabled project. And I'm going to explain what that is in just a few minutes. In the second quarter of 2022, in April, the board received information from staff on eligible projects for water infrastructure. At a special meeting, the board tabled discussion on ARPA funding recommendations and related to water, and then directed staff to bring back alternative recommendations. And at the second meeting in April, the board received staff recommendations on those alternative project recommendations and approved these following projects. Again, some of these were moved to ARPA-enabled project, which I'll get to in a minute. And you'll see that there was an increase to the Southwest Regional Library at that time as well. Then in May, the board approved a staff recommendation for some additional smaller projects. Again, some of those were later moved to an ARPA-enabled project. In June, the board of 2022, the board accepted the second tranche of ARPA funds, the rest of the $46.5 million, and approved a grant project ordinance for all projects, associated capital project ordinances for those capital projects, as well as approving the Indian Trail water line. Moving into the third quarter of 2022, in September, the board approved staff recommendations to use revenue replacement and restoring public sector capacity on salaries and benefits to fund ARPA-enabled projects. And you'll see those asterisked here. Essentially, an ARPA-enabled project means that a project is now being funded by county general funds that were freed up by using ARPA to reimburse ourselves for salaries and benefits under revenue replacement and restoring public sector capacity. So with revenue replacement, we used that $10 million. We paid ourselves back for salaries and benefits, and we established some positions that were vacant during the pandemic, and we are funding salaries and benefits for that. And that essentially frees up general funds for us to be able to do ARPA-enabled project. The reason why you would do this is because we could not point to an enumerated use for some of the projects that the board had approved, and we couldn't point to that in the final rule. So essentially, we didn't feel comfortable that those would be eligible projects being funded directly with ARPA. And I will say the vast majority of jurisdictions in North Carolina have done this in some way, shape, or form. Many of them, especially if their allocations were under $10 million or about $10 million, they used it all for revenue replacement as well. The current board in 2023, in the first quarter, in February, the board initially approved including the use of unspent ARPA funds for 12 Mile Creek for financial rate model planning purposes, and then switched gears a little bit in March and approved using unspent ARPA funds for the Crooked Creek Interceptor Expansion Project. And that's where we are today. So here's the current status. These are the direct ARPA projects You can see the 46.5 million is full amounts have been allocated. In the far right column, you'll see the actuals. We spent close to $19.7 million. You're going to see here that we're recommending removal of the Yadkin parallel distribution water line. That essentially frees up that $10 million in unspent ARPA funds for the Crooked Creek Interceptor project from being a direct ARPA project. These are the ARPA-enabled projects. So these are the approved amounts. Again, we're recommending removal of the Public Safety Training Center as well as the Farmers Market improvements. Again, that frees up the unspent ARPA funds for that Crooked Creek Interceptor project. So our recommendations and the next steps is essentially to come back to you at the next regular meeting to amend the grant project ordinance and associated capital project ordinances. We would essentially add the Crooked Creek Interceptor project as a direct ARPA project. We would remove those projects I just mentioned. There's various issues why. There's timing issues, ensuring that they're completed by the time the funding runs out. The anticipated availability of other funding, or we're just no longer pursuing that project. Another recommendation would be to move the Indian Trail water line to an ARPA-enabled project as well. The reason being is that is a very small project. Indian Trail initially was going to use ARPA funds for that. They are not doing that anymore. They're using general funds. And we think that bidding this project out with all of those federal requirements for such a small project, we might not get the bidders or the competition that we're looking for. And then we would also ask at the next regular meeting to appropriate the ARPA investment earnings. These are earnings that because we've invested the funds that we've received to date, we've developed some earnings from that. There are no strings attached to those investment earnings. The county can use those funds as they wish. And what we would recommend is to use a portion of those funds to purchase a grants management system for approval at a future meeting, a very small portion of those investment earnings. And I listed some of the benefits of that here, but that would help us track the ARPA funds rather than using spreadsheets and manual processes to do that, as well as apply that to all of our other state and federal grants that we are currently managing. I'm happy to take any questions.
Anybody have questions?
What are the earnings, do you know?
How much?
Mm-hmm.
I believe they're close to $1.3 million.
Anybody else have a question? Right. And
Thank you.
You don't need any action from us tonight?
Not
correct?
tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have the Comprehensive Water and Wastewater Master Plan Update, draft CIP. Hung-Yee?
I don't think this man needs an introduction.
Oh.
I'll point those out as we go, but we've reached a point where we have enough information that we'd like to share it with y'all and get a chance for y'all to ask questions if there's anything you would like some more information about as we continue to develop the master plan. So what we'll go through tonight is the general approach and assumptions, summary of the CIP cost estimates, talk about the Catawba water treatment plant expansion, the wastewater treatment improvements, water distribution system improvements. We're also going to show you what the system looks like with and without the CIP in terms of system performance, and then finally wrap up with the wastewater collection system improvements. So for our general approach, so we understand that the board's given a lot of scrutiny to how much projects you want to finance. So what we've taken for this approach is to prioritize based on immediate needs. So we're looking at projects to address 2025 capacity shortfalls. So things that are identified to manifest as a capacity problem in the year 2025. Things that manifest as a capacity problem in later years, we're kind of putting those on the back burner. We are also sizing conveyance improvements to the year 2040 population conditions, just so you can understand the assumptions there. Also, generally speaking, for pipelines, we are sizing pipelines as parallel systems, not as pipe replacements. So basically what that means is you'll continue getting use out of your existing assets. We're just going to add a parallel pipe to increase the capacity where needed. And finally, we'll size treatment facilities to some practical horizon. Generally speaking, we're aiming to not have to do plant expansions any sooner than every 10 years, but there's certainly some flexibility in that. All right, so projects and cost estimates that are not included that you won't see tonight. Cost estimates for rehabilitation projects across the board. Expansion of 12 Mile Creek Water Reclamation Facility. You guys have probably more updated cost estimates from that design that are more detailed than what we'll provide. We also have not included expansion to the Popland Road Pump Station and Flow Equalization Facilities or subsequent downstream improvements. So those facilities were designed to function through the year 2030. The reason for that is that it was intended to send that pump station over to the new plant at Site B eventually. So not an immediate concern, but eventually you would need to do some improvements to that site just because of what the design life is. And just rehashing, anything that's manifest as a capacity shortfall after 2025 we haven't addressed. But something you will see later is many of the projects that are included here have long-term benefits, and we'll show you what those are as we get there. For pricing assumptions, I'm not going to go through all this in detail, but this basically describes how we did markups to cover things like general conditions, construction contingency, design engineering, land acquisition, and so forth. One area where we made a little bit different from the norm is on general conditions and construction contingency for elevated storage tanks. Elevated storage tanks tend to be a little less complex projects with a little less uncertainty in them. So for those projects, we back down a little bit on the markup for those. So those will be a little different than, say, a pipeline or a pump station project for that reason. Unit costs have been compiled from databases of recent local projects and national projects and using engineering judgment. And all projects improvements are sized assuming option 1 system configuration. We'll talk about what that means. So this might have been 2 meetings ago. So just as a refresher, system configuration means what parts of the system are served by which water plant. So option 1 system configuration is the name we have for this, is the areas shown in green would be served by the existing Catawba water treatment plant. Areas shown in blue will be served by Yadkin. One little change is this little northeast region of 853 West is going to be moved over to be served by Yadkin. That means the service has to come from 853 East instead of 853 West. The reason we're doing that is because we want to balance your interbasin transfer compliance. We talked about this, I think, 2 meetings ago, and to try to put more load onto that Yadkin plant, take some load off Catawba. So that's the balance of both those 2 things. The reason I'm pointing this out is because system configuration is hugely important to the sizing. If you change the system configuration, the sizing of all these elements we're going to show you are going to change. So that's particularly true for elevated storage tanks, and I'll show you some of the ones that are particularly sensitive to that. But just wanted to point that out. This system configuration is fundamental to the CIP that we'll be looking at. All right. So the cost estimate summary. So this is a list of all the projects to address the capacity shortfalls that we presented at the last 2 meetings. And again, these are for items that manifest in the year 2025. So we have all these projects in detail in the presentation. We can look at these later. Total comes in at $652 million. One item to point out about addition here is we're going to show you 2 options for wastewater treatment, alternative 1 and alternative 2. For purposes of this summation on this table, we've selected alternative 2 just because you wouldn't do both. So that's just how the math works on this to explain how that addition worked out. This includes wastewater treatment, water distribution, and wastewater collection. All right, so the first project up is the Catawba water treatment plant improvements. The driver for this is that we need to expand the plant to meet 2025 max day demands. And the numbers we're going to talk about is exclusively Union County's portion of this plant. If you recall, you co-own this with Lancaster. So What you would need to do is expand this plant to 34 MGD is the expansion. That would get you through the year 2040. Two caveats here is this expansion needs to be coordinated with Lancaster because they will have water demands as well, and we really need to coordinate with them to figure out precise sizing and possible phasing if we could break this up into smaller pieces. The other item that's really important here, and this goes back to that system configuration we talked about earlier, is this expansion scope is highly dependent on the wastewater treatment approach that you ultimately select, and we'll look at that a little bit later. But just to give you an example of the numbers, this is an expansion of 14 MGD to that plant. Were you to select a different wastewater treatment approach, you could almost cut that in half because you could transfer more of the water demand over to the Yadkin plant versus the Catawba plant. So that's why I'm going to keep emphasizing that several points tonight, is that system configuration really matters, and some of the choices you make really affect the rest of the system. All right. So this total comes in at $168 million for this expansion. Same caveats apply. We need to coordinate with Lancaster. There could be opportunities to phase this and build it in chunks, but we really need to know what Lancaster needs before we can start breaking up into smaller projects. So this is just what the cost to Union County would be for that full 14 MGD expansion. All right. Wastewater treatment plant improvements. So the first 5 plants or agreements, we're not recommending any capital improvements. So Old Sycamore, Tallwood, Grassy Branch, East Side, that's via agreement with Monroe, and 6 Mile, that's with agreement to Charlotte Water. No capital improvements. All of those either don't have capacity problems or otherwise being addressed by other improvements or being managed via agreement or operational changes. We are going to look at 2 alternatives for treatment on the west side. So one of them would be to expand the Crooked Creek water reclamation facility. And so this would be an expansion, we say here 2.5 plus MGD. One thing that's really important to point out here is this likely is not feasible. The stream that receives, that this effluent goes into, just doesn't have assimilative capacity left to take on more effluent. But we do want to keep this in here because it's a good comparison to alternative 2. But just keep that in mind that there's some permitting and technical feasibility issues with that option. We're also going to look at alternative 2, which is building the new plant at Site B. We'll talk about the details of that in a moment. And then finally, expansion to 12 Mile Creek Water Reclamation Facility. We'll get to that in due time, but let's jump into these alternatives. So the driver for expanding Crooked Creek is, if you recall from I think 2 meetings ago, we looked at wastewater treatment plant capacity. And this graph is showing you the green is the projected max month flow, that's a permitted limit on the plant, starting to exceed the plant limit in 2025. You also have this blue line that is the average daily flow, and what you're looking at here is when it crosses these dashed lines, which represent the 80-90 rule, which is another threshold we look at for plant capacity. One thing to point out for this is that this is showing long-term trends. This graph does not include committed flows that you've already made to folks. So what that basically means is your near-term capacity picture might not be as optimistic as what this would say, just because you've already made flow commitments at this plant.
So this doesn't show our permitted and pending?
It does not, and I'm glad Jay pointed that out. It may say 90% by 2035. We're not going to make it to 2035 based on what we've already permitted and what's in the review cycle. This is really, as Jay said, based on trends and actual flows. So just understand that.
Okay. So that is what's triggering the need for the expansion. So we looked at a couple of ways to do this, and what the alternative is priced around is the following. Expanding Crooked Creek using an intensified secondary treatment. The issue here is, you can see this is the Crooked Creek plant, It's surrounded by occupied parcels. So the only way really to expand it would be to buy adjacent parcels and build more plant outside there. Short of that, you could use technologies called intensification, which basically allows you to put more treatment capacity on a smaller footprint. There's multiple different ways to do it, but it's a different technology than conventional wastewater treatment.
When did that technology become available?
That's a good question. It's probably been around 10 years. It's relatively new. It's not been around as long as like activated sludge, for example.
Because in 8 years, I've never heard it.
There's several proprietary names. I don't know if I want to say one of them, but it's.
We'll go into closed session.
I don't know if it's warranted. We're not recommending this for the record, but it's there are technologies that can do it that exist, and they are, I'll say, relatively new. How about that? So what we would do here is we would fully convert the existing plant. So the reason we're saying that is because one reason is the plant is in need of rehab. There are rehab needs. Converting the existing plant allows you to abandon some of the infrastructure and not incur the rehab cost. The other issue is if you put an intensified treatment on the site, you'd effectively be running 2 plants on one site, which can be cumbersome from an operations perspective. So we're going to say convert the entire site.
How many gallons could that get us?
That's a good question. We don't exactly know. That's something that's going to take more study. We think 3 MGD, but that's an estimate. There's a lot of uncertainty here. And so that's a real key takeaway.
Make sure it's not an additional 3 MG. It's up to a total possibly.
Correct.
So we would be going from 1.9 to 3?
Correct. 1.1 net increase.
Okay.
Correct. So pretty modest increase.
Do you have a cost on that?
I do. We're going to look at that in a second. The risks are really important. This might not be possible from a permitting perspective. It's actually likely not possible from a permitting perspective. It also has some challenges with maintenance of plant operations, or MOPO. You'll hear that acronym. Because the plant is so constrained, if you expand a plant, you've got to build stuff on it while the plant's still running. When you're on a tight site, that gets more complicated and more expensive because there's just no room to put stuff, basically. There's also uncertainty in expansion potential. We don't know how much we could get out of this, and there's also a lot of uncertainty in cost due to the technology, space limitations, and the MOPO. So not a great alternative, but we'll take a look at it just as a comparison. So to do that conversion would be $120 million. So that is a lot of money for 1.1 net increase in demand. It's quite an expensive process to go through.
Have we got our discharge permit yet for Site B? Thank you.
All right, so that's alternative 1. We're going to come back to this when we compare the alternatives. The other alternative is what kind of shorthand has become Site B. Let me walk through some of this because there's a lot of pieces to this. So this would involve constructing a new water reclamation facility or wastewater treatment plant here just a little bit to the east of the Popland Road pump station. What we would do is take flow from Crooked Creek and Popland and send them to this new treatment plant. That would allow you to decommission the Crooked Creek facility completely. The only parts you would need to keep in operation would be a transfer pump station to send flow to the new plant and probably some flow equalization. What this does is a couple of things. One, it takes Crooked Creek offline, but it also takes the Popland Road flows off of the 12 Mile Creek treatment plant. So that plant likely will need future expansion as well. Taking that flow off of that is a benefit. It'll allow you to maybe postpone that future expansion. The other one is a little more difficult to explain, so just bear with me, is a benefit to the way your water system could work. So if you see this dashed gray line going down the middle of the map, that is the ridge line between the Catawba Basin and the Rocky River Basin. So right now what happens is Popland discharges flow back into the Catawba Basin. It flows via that pump station back into 12 Mile via that force main. That creates some challenges in terms of serving poplin from the Yadkin plant. You don't want to send water from Yadkin back into Catawba. That's not the way the IBT is written. By keeping poplin in the Rocky River Basin, you are opening poplin to be served by the Yadkin River, or the Yadkin Water Treatment Plant. And furthermore, you'd also be able to serve Crooked Creek by the Yadkin River Plant. Because of that, you're going to be able to use that new capacity at that plant instead of making a large expansion at Catawba. So this is an example of where how you execute the wastewater system makes a big difference in what you need to do on the water system. So let me pause there. That's a lot to give you guys right now. We're going to look at cost in a second, but any questions on fundamentals of this one? All right. So this is just more details on this, just as a zoom in. This is where we build a new plant. You'd also have to construct about a 10,000-foot, 48-inch gravity sewer. It would allow you to decommission the Fieldstone pump station, that's here, item 3. You would also be able to decommission many parts of Poplin because it could just now flow by gravity into the new plant. And you would have to convert some of the pumping systems at Catawba now to pump up to this system to get it into the plant. So a couple of other details on this. This gets you a net 4.1 increase in capacity. It's a 6 MGD plant. You're decommissioning Crooked, so that takes 1.9 MGD back. So that's why there's that net. As I mentioned, this could delay the next expansion of 12 Mile. It reduces the expansion of the Catawba water treatment plant by putting more demand on Yadkin, eliminates Fieldstone pump station, also would allow Hundley pump station improvements to be done without Poplin EQ. Hundley is a pump station up here to the north that's fairly sizable, and when it's designed, we're going to have to carefully coordinate that with Poplin. But if Poplin is just flowing by gravity, that's no longer a concern. And the new site has already been purchased. So looking at the total here, $229 million, and that's including the new plant, new sewer, reconfiguration of pumping at Catawba River, some demolition and modification of the existing force main to handle as a transfer facility. Just as a point in comparison, there's a 2021 cost estimate that provided the same scope as a range of $124 to $270 million. So we're falling, in the middle, but a little closer up towards the high end as a point of comparison.
Real quick while you're there. It's the first time I'm ever seeing 228 million. I've always heard 300 million for that plant.
And I'll tell you where, originally the Black and Veatch's, as Jay indicated, had a 124 to 270. Obviously, it's been our experience that even when we give you an estimate, it always comes in higher than that. So we just rounded that number up and said it's roughly probably going to be 300 million. These are all general estimates. They're called the planning estimate. So it's very possible that when it comes time to actually construct this, these numbers are not going to be what you're going to see in a construction bid. These are the best estimates we can do at this point in time.
And I'm not, I'm just saying that if I was going to round up, I wouldn't round from 228 to 300 million. I'd round up to 230.
No, it was 270 to 300 is what, that's where you got the 300. It went from 270.
I agree with you. It'll probably be 300 million.
And we can still, we're not making budgetary decisions yet, so
I
we can always push this up because it's advisable if you do have projects that you're concerned about.
You ever sell
risk.
cars?
What's that?
You ever sell a car?
No, sir.
You'd be good at it.
You think so?
Yeah.
All right.
You start at one price, and when you get out there.
Well, if engineering doesn't work out, I know I'll have something to fall back on. Okay. All right. They do it all online now. I don't know if that's a job anymore. All right. So that's alternative to construction at Site B. So let's do a comparison of the two alternatives, comparing the benefits to the drawbacks. So alternative one, that's the $120 million. That does maximize the use of your existing facilities. You're not constructing anything new to do this. It does have a fatal flaw due to the permitting, so this is probably not something you could advance, but it's significant on the drawback side, really significant capital costs for not much of a gain in capacity. It pushes you to earlier expansion of 12 Mile because you have to keep Poplar going down to 12 Mile. It is a larger expansion to the Catawba plant versus Alternative 2. You will need upgrades to Poplar Pump Station and Flow EQ. Again, those are sized to 2030. Those aren't included in this pricing, but that's an additional cost that you would incur at some point. We mentioned that Hundley Creek would have to be closely coordinated with the Poplar Road improvements. We mentioned the maintenance of plant operations risk, tremendous uncertainty in costs here. The technology used here would be substantially different than that used at other Union County facilities. Potentially higher O&M costs depending on the technology selected. And finally, there's really no way to expand this. You're constrained by the existing site, so this would be maxing out the site as to what it could do.
Real quick, go back to that. You're likely infeasible due to significant permitting challenges. Those permitting challenges, I assume, would be discharging at the point we currently discharge at.
Correct.
But even with the new plant, you're talking about discharging further down the creek, I believe, is what we heard. So if we discharge further down the creek, would those limitations still be there?
Those limitations might go away, but the cost wouldn't. What's driving the cost is the space limitations.
Is the what?
The space limitations. It's the fact that the plant
Correct.
site is so tight. I mean, yes, that if we could discharge further downstream, possibly that could eliminate that permitting threshold.
And understand that the cost to pipe that to a different location is not baked into those numbers. So it is possible, but there would be some additional
Are those
costs.
costs baked into the 228 million?
No, sir. Because actually, that one actually, I think we said it wrong. That actually is planned to discharge at the site, not be extended.
228 million?
Yes, sir.
Which, you know, we've heard different plans about taking it down the river or closer to the river to discharge it down the creek.
Yeah, the discharge permit request is for the site.
For the site?
Yes, sir.
And the one we don't have back yet? Okay, so new technology is available. We have the power of condemnation if we needed to buy land there. What do we do with that old plant? What do we sell that land for, fast food restaurant, or what do we do there?
I'm not sure. You'd need to, under option B,
No,
option 2.
if we take down the existing Crooked Creek plant.
You would have to keep some of it because some of the plant has to stay there to be the transfer station to send it to the new plant. You've got to pump the flow back, so you need space for a pump station and use some of the existing facilities for flow equalization, so you need some of that tankage. The rest of it, you could demolish. I'm not sure. I can't answer what you could do about resale.
So we can't use it for commercial properties or anything?
I don't think it would be suitable for that, in my opinion.
Okay.
All right. So let's flip over and look at the alternative 2. This is construction at the new site B. So on the benefit side, it's a bigger gain in capacity than alternative 1. And I think the most... We think. Because we haven't got our discharge permit yet. Fair, okay.
A speculative study, though.
Yeah. It's, the big one here is this better value. You're getting significantly more treatment capacity with that caveat. And you're getting system-wide benefits versus alternative 1. So because these next 3 bullets are all together, because you're getting better utilization of IBT, that's going to let you use more of the Catawba plant than you would otherwise. Mentioned relieving flow from 12 Mile Creek, possible cost savings there from delaying the next expansion. If Fieldstone Pump Station is taken offline, we've got programmed in here an upgrade to that station, or replacement actually, at $5 million. You would not have to execute that project if you chose alternative 2. Decommissioning the aging Crooked Creek facility. I mentioned the land is already purchased, and you would long-term have space for future expansion. The drawback of this one is that it does require multiple components to be constructed at the same time. So this, there's only so many ways you could break this up and phase it because everything has to work together. So that's an important point on this one to be aware of. Let me pause there. One thing I will say is that we're not asking you to make a decision on this tonight, but the choice about whether to build a new plant here or somewhere in the Rocky River Basin, as you'll see in some of the other projects, makes a huge difference in sizing. So this is kind of a fundamental question for the water and sewer master plan, is where we want to put this plant, because it affects both the water system and it affects some sizing of sewer systems. So don't have to decide tonight, but just pointing that out, that this decision touches many, many, many parts of the planned CIP. And it would be very different whether you chose to build on Site B or not build on Site B would fundamentally change a lot of parts of the master plan, or it'd be different, would be a better way to say that.
And I said that 6, 7 years ago and was told, no, that's not true. But it is true.
It is true.
It is true. Thank you.
All right. So last one we'll look at is, and then I'll pause after this one so we can pause for questions. So 12 Mile Creek, this is the same graphic we've been looking at, showing capacity versus planned improvements. You have this expansion to 9 MGD that should be complete by 2026. Again, as we mentioned earlier, committed flows are not shown here. As currently stands, if Poplin is going to keep coming to this plant, we would recommend you start planning for the next expansion to occur soon after the 9 MGD. If Poplin were taken offline, and this graph assumes Poplin is keeping going here, you could reduce that top green line by around 1.8 MGD roughly. It changes over time, but that's a pretty good estimate of how much a reduction you would get.
And you may have said this, but just for the benefit of the people watching, MMF is what?
Oh, maximum month flow. That's the way flow is defined in a wastewater permit. All right. So that's it for the wastewater section. Any questions, anything you guys want to drill into in more detail before we start looking at pipes and pump stations?
What was the suggested speculative limit for Site B? Speculative?
I think we're requesting up to 8. Now it's what we get back, but I believe we requested up to 8 MGD.
Okay. And this is at 4.1. Okay.
All right. So water distribution system improvements. For this one, I'm probably going to pick up the pace a little bit because this is going to get repetitive. So stop me if we want to pause on anything. I'll try to hit the highlights and things that are noteworthy, but otherwise I will go pretty quick through these parts. So these are the recommended transmission main improvements. So starting up top is the 853 West pressure zone change. This is that part that's creating the option 1 configuration. We're moving that little purple area to be served by 853 East instead of 853 West, and subsequently served by Yadkin. And we're going to look at each one of these specifically so you can see the scopes of them. The 880 transmission main is here in the 880 pressure zone. 821 Providence Road Booster Pump Station, that's what BPS stands for. Supply mains. That's actually one project, but it's 2 pipelines separated a little ways. What I want to point out is that these 2 projects combined with your existing Providence Road Booster Pump Station act to fix a lot of the minimum pressures and fire flows in both of those basins. So you can kind of think of those projects as working together. We also have...
Which ones should we look at together for that?
That would be the 880 transmission main and the 821, the Providence Road Booster Pump Station supply mains. In short, the green projects, they make the pump station work better. They boost its capacity by feeding it. Then we also have the 853 South transmission main that's shown in blue. One point on that is you're also going to see a tank recommendation for 853 South, and you'll also see a recommendation to upgrade the Highway 75 booster pump station. Those 3 projects do have to be done together to get the full benefit to that system. They all work together. And then finally, the 762 transmission main over here south of Marshville. So in all cases, these projects basically correct either low pressures and or fire flow issues that we looked at the last meeting. All right, so this is one that I will dwell on just a bit. This is the area that's being transferred to be served by the Yadkin water treatment plant. A couple of things need to happen. We need to close off and open some valves to basically cut this area off of where it's served now and now serve it from the east. One thing that we'll also have to do is build a transmission main in to provide some additional service, because now we're switching what direction this is being served from. One thing I'll point out is this specific system configuration and valving is one of the things that's still being evaluated, so this could change a little bit, and that could affect the scope and cost for this one. This is also an area were you to go with the new plant at Site B, you could expand this area as we talked about earlier. So that's 23.5 million. Going to, this is where I'm going to speed up because this is going to all look kind of the same going forward, but this is the 821 Providence Road Booster Pump Station supply mains. So 2 segments of line, that is 13.4 million. 853 South Transmission Main, 40,000 feet of 12-inch. That's at 23.6 million. And again, that does need to be constructed with also the elevated storage tank and Highway 75 booster pump station. The 762 transmission main, one comment on this route. This is not necessarily a recommended route. We're trying to put enough length into this so that when you design this, you've got flexibility about where you want to put the pipeline. So this is purely conceptual, purely conceptual because we want to give the designers a lot of flexibility in terms of where to put the pipe. But that one comes in at 52 million for 762 South. 880 zone, again, this is the one that works in concert with the 821 improvements. That comes in at 6.3 million. All right, now we're going to look at the elevated storage tanks, and there are 4. So we're recommending new tank in the 935 zone, 853 West. You've probably seen that before. That's called the Indian Trail tank. 853 South elevated tank, and then 853 East elevated tank. In all cases, these are driven by the need to provide equalization and fire flow storage in all these systems. And this tank, this is the new Indian Trail tank at 14.5 million. One thing noteworthy about this one is this one would change depending on what the system configuration looks like. If that boundary shifted west, this tank would probably get smaller. If the boundary shifted east, it would probably get larger. 853 East, same thing. It's a smaller tank at 500,000 gallons, $2.8 million. Also largely affected by system configuration.
That's the one in New Salem.
What's that?
That's the one in northeastern Union County.
Yes. 853 East, sorry, that's the one we just looked at. 935, this is kind of a unique approach to pricing. 935, let me scroll up here just so you can see this. 935 is your smallest pressure zone. There's been a concern that can we locate a tank site within that small area. So what we've done for pricing only, this is to give you future flexibility, is we've priced this as if you will build a new larger tank adjacent to the existing and tear down the existing. So build it on the same site because you might not be able to find a site for the new tank. So we priced it as replacement and upsize, and that comes in at $5.4 million. If you are able to find a site for a new smaller tank, you would have substantial cost savings. You could build it at half the size, but we're budgeting it this way just to give you future flexibility about how to build this tank. Then 853 South at 2.2 million. That's, again, this is the one that's to be coordinated with the transmission main and the booster pump station. Booster pump station, the only one we've got is Highway 75 right here is one we're recommending to be upgraded, and that would be 13.7 million. And it's budgeted as a replacement. Okay, So with all that, we wanted to show you what's the benefit of all that construction. So what happens when you pull that in? How does the system performance change? So if you recall from last meeting, this is a map showing the minimum pressures in the system under 2025 conditions for option 1. So as a reminder, ideally we'd like to be 40 PSI or greater in terms of service pressure. 30 PSI is considered acceptable. So what you're seeing on the map is green is 30 to 39 PSI, yellow is 20 to 29, orange is 1 to 19, red is 0 or possibly negative pressure. So again, this is the system as is. Put in all these improvements and almost all of that goes away. You do still have some areas of green that might need a future project to deal with, but nonetheless, this clears up quite a few problems. The remaining areas of yellow are isolated, not really related to transmission main capacity, so this corrects quite a few of the pressure issues in the area. And just case in point, if you don't have if there's no colored dots at all, that means you're greater than 40 PSI. So this brings most of that area to or above the standard we're trying to meet.
Could you go back one slide again to where it is currently? Okay, so this is current PSI readings. Okay, and as we can see, there are quite a few that are below acceptable. Okay, so if somebody has a house that's burning down or there's a fire in a strip mall, this affects public health and safety.
Yeah, we're going to look at fire.
And just to kind of start in terms of your presentation, this whole presentation is geared towards problems that are manifested now or will by 2025 during the term of 3 of these commissioners, for this current term. Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, so let's look at pressures for 2040. Now remember, we're targeting kind of near-term projects, but this does have long-term benefits, and we wanted to show you what just these projects do, even going out till 2040. So that's what the pressures would look like unmitigated in 2040. With the projects that we just showed you, many of those problems disappear as well. Now, it doesn't fix everything. So what this means is that in the future, you're going to need probably some additional projects in this area where you see this cluster of pressure, but just showing you this to show that these projects, even though they're triggered by near-term capacity issues, they solve problems further into the future, and they're sized for problems further in the future. All right, we'll look at fire flow next. So this is the same map we looked at last week, the unmitigated fire flow for option 1. So if you recall fire flow, we look at a target of between 1,000 and 3,500 gallons per minute. It varies based on the land use, so it does vary based on location. The yellow dots mean you're deficient by 250 GPM or less. Orange dots are between 250 and 500 GPM deficiency. Red are greater than 500 GPM deficiency. The ones to point out that are more what I would call kind of the systematic problems are this area here in 853 South, this area in 762, and this area up in the new option 1. A lot of the other dots you see on this are isolated. They're like dead-end lines that wouldn't necessarily be affected by transmission main capacity. It couldn't be corrected by transmission main capacity.
So now this says maintain 20 PSI.
Correct. For fire flow, you have a different standard of pressure because it's an emergency. You're willing to accept a lower pressure.
Oh, okay, so what Commissioner Williams has said, just forget that, it's 30, not 30, it's 20?
No, it's, it depends on the condition you're trying to plan for. So for service pressure, you want it high. You want it up at 40.
So a lot of the dots that I see are in the Rocky River subbasin on this picture here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we still don't have Yadkin water. We're hopefully we'll get it one day, by the end of the year maybe, right?
Yes, sir.
By the end of the year. So will that help these dots?
This is more a matter of system configuration and piping than the source.
And tanks,
Correct.
elevated tanks, which are $2 million,
Yeah.
$5 million. Okay. Thank you.
So with those improvements, you can see that most of the issues in 762, 853, and in the conversion area go away. So most of the remaining problems are more the isolated kind of one-off problem areas that aren't related to transmission main capacity. If we jump ahead and look at 2040, and this is the same map we looked at last time, you can see that unmitigated, the fire flows just get worse because of growth. More people come on the system, drives up the issue. These improvements still correct for most of the fire flow issues in 853 South, 762, and in the areas of option 1. So this does have some long-term benefits, even though it's triggered by near-term capacity limitations. All right, so wastewater collection system capacity, this is the last one.
One more thing, go back to the 2040 fire flows option, well, improvements. So without the CIP improvements, which are the tanks, not sewer plants.
Correct.
Yeah, those are all water tanks, not
Well, it's not
sewer.
just tanks, it's pipelines and pump stations too.
Right, for water.
Correct.
Not wastewater.
Correct.
And so if we don't do the tanks and the pipes for water, that's what could happen. And then the next one is what could happen if we do those upfits, right? Option 1?
Correct.
Okay.
Another way to say it is this is showing you what your water system performance would be with all those improvements in place.
Okay.
All right. So wastewater collection system capacity improvements, sorry, we have a typo on that one. We've got some sewers and pump stations. So in all cases, we're going to look at the sewers first. This is to address capacity issues. Those capacity issues manifest themselves by looking at how much surcharge we observe in the sewers. So the projects listed are Poplin Branch Sewer, that's shown in green up here in the north. South Crooked Creek, South Fork, pardon me, of Crooked Creek, shown here in the teal. Price Mill Sewer, Upper East Fork Sewer, shown here in blue. Molly Creek Branch Sewer, that's this in red, it's kind of a side branch of the East Fork. And finally, the East Fork Interceptor, and that's the most substantial project of all these to deal with capacity issues here in the middle of the basin.
And which one was that again?
East Fork Interceptor.
Okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't connect to the Poplin Road pump station, does it?
It does. So right now, Poplin Road comes down, this is the force main. Poplin Road discharges right here, and it flows by gravity down to 12 Mile Creek.
Past or let's see, I'm trying to see all the colors here. So there's blue and red.
Poplin flows through the blue.
I'm taking that red is the problem, and
No, it's just helping you to see which projects.
The different
are identified.
projects.
That's not good or bad, it's just showing you that there's a project there and that's red, there's a project that's purple, there's a project that's blue.
okay.
Yeah.
But we do have a size limitation in those lines to convey waste, correct?
Correct. Correct. And that's and for clarity on East Fork specifically, that shortfall exists with or without Poplin. So let's look, we'll do the same thing on this one. I'll go pretty quickly through some of the more conventional ones, but one I wanted to talk a little bit about is this is the East Fork Interceptor. This is 30,000 feet of 30-inch pipe. Comes in at $44 million. This sizing and cost is preliminary. We're still looking at what's the long-term impact from flow from Poplin coming through 12 Mile. Poplin does buffer its peak flows a little bit, so we're still looking at how to account for that for future flows. So just something to be aware of, that this one's still a little bit in development. But the trigger for this is existing capacity issues. So whether you took Poplin off of this or not, you still need this project, just for clarity. So the rest of these are just pipelines. All of them are to relieve capacity limitations. So this is Price Mill at 3.8 million, Upper East Fork at 5 million, Molly Branch at 5.9 million, Crooked Creek at South Fork at 8.3, and Poplar Branch Sewer at 6.2. So now we're going to go into the pump stations. So the first one up is going to be Fieldstone. We're budgeting this as a replacement to the pump station at 1.1 million gallons per day in capacity. This is at 4.8 million. This is one that were you to build the new plant at Site B, this would discharge directly to a sewer and you wouldn't need to execute this project. Hundley Pump Station improvements, this is one of the larger ones. This is a 3.3 million gallon per day replacement at 14 million. This is the one that will need to be closely coordinated with the Poplar Road facility. The Forest Park, I think this is the last one, the Forest Park Pump Station, this is an upgrade to 2.4 MGD. This one's a little different than the others. This pump station, we feel pretty comfortable that it is expandable without being a replacement. So we're budgeting this as a expansion rather than as a replacement. And that's at 4.8 million. And that's it. So a lot of material, and you've got, I think, a lot of this in the handout, so you can drill into it more. But any questions or anything you guys would like to see more on? Yeah. All right, well, thank you.
Any questions for Jay? Okay. Back up, because I know the next item was really sort of to talk about how we move forward with rates and fees. And I'm not asking for the board to make any official decisions tonight. Obviously, one of the things that I have to do is program in my budget that I present to you how we're going to handle the enterprise. That's part of the budget. So I'll be asking for some input from the board so that when I bring you the budget presentation on June 5th, whatever we sort of talk about here will be baked into that presentation, and you won't be surprised when you see that. And then ultimately adoption would be June 19th. So I think some of the takeaways that you saw from the presentation from Jay is that it's a system. And so when we make decisions about sewer, it has an impact on water. When we make decisions about water, it has an impact on sewer, vice versa. They act as a system. And oftentimes, if we decide to expand in one place, it creates the need to expand somewhere else. It's just that's how the system operates. So part of the takeaways are we're going to see this as long as we run and operate a utility. You're just going to have those things that you have to deal with over time. I want to talk about the estimates, make sure everyone's very clear. Yes, they have a very large contingency on there, and that's because they're planning numbers. The actual construction numbers will be whatever they be whenever the board decides to move forward with construction on them. And they get better as we get additional information and as we do additional engineering on them. They get better. But the number's not small, $652 million. Of that $652 million estimated, about $400 million of that was previously included in the capital plan that was adopted by the prior board. So there was roughly $400 million of that a part of that CIP. Now, some of those projects had estimates were done in 2016, so those estimates obviously have changed, and that's why those numbers have grown a little bit from 400 to 652. And then there's projects that are also that weren't contemplated in the master plan. They weren't in that CIP. So of that 652, about 400 were projects we knew we would have to think about sometime in the very near future, but those estimates were done in 2016, so just be aware of that. One of the things that Jay talked about are the IBT issues, and that's something we're going to have to manage as long as we are sending water from the Catawba Regional Plant, Catawba Water Plant. As long as we send that water over into the Yadkin Basin, we're going to have to manage that IBT. And so over time, that is going to become increasingly more difficult until we make some decisions about what we do with wastewater in that area and water in that area. So just keep that in mind. One of the other things I want to say is that we're not telling you that you absolutely have to do everything on here. We're telling you that if we don't do some of these things on here, or even all of these things in here, there will be an impact. Is it in 2025? Is it in 2030, 2040? These are based on models. These are based on things that we estimate will happen. I can't promise you what day it's going to happen. But at some point in time, we will have an impact to the system if we don't make investments in some of these things. Just keep that in mind. So you don't have to adopt all of these things. Just be aware there will be an impact at some point.
Brian, what would that impact be?
Well, 'cause sewer overflows, so specifically the East Fork, that's a good example. That project is already at surcharge conditions. That's not something that we're saying we think is going to happen. We already know it's at surcharge conditions.
So that's repair to the system, though. That's not new. That's repairing the system.
Well, that's not new. That's an issue where the flow has exceeded the way the pipe can actually handle it. And it was anticipated in the 2016 master plan that we needed to expand that East Fork system. We already knew that that was coming. Obviously, it's coming a lot quicker. But if we don't do something about that, then at some point in time, we will have sewer overflows. I don't know when those will happen, but that could happen. The other issue is obviously with pressures. We will have a drop in pressures for our customers if we don't make some modifications and changes to our water system. That's just inevitable. Again, can't tell you, is that a year, 2 years, 5 years? But we will have those effects at some point in time. What is not built into the current capital plan is the cost of having to rehabilitate Crooked Creek existing plant to operate it for longer than what we originally estimated. So currently, the plant would operate for another 10 plus years. It was not anticipated we were going to operate that plant for another 10 plus years. So in the original capital plan, you weren't anticipating that plant would operate longer. So we're going to have to actually invest more in that plant in order to operate it longer. We really don't know what that cost is. That's not in here. It hasn't been evaluated. I couldn't tell you if it's 10 million or 50 million. I don't know the number to that. But just keep in mind, we're going to have to do that at some point as well. I talked about the East Fork. So let's talk about what we can do based on what the discussions we had with the board. So there were some things that the board sort of nodded your head about that we would consider in the budget. One was using our depreciation reserves in order to help fund our capital plan. That is currently still being proposed. And that's roughly about $20 million. Am I right about that? It's about 20 million? It's roughly about 20 million that we're putting into the system to help with those costs. The board sort of nodded their head that yes, we were going to spend $16 million of ARPA funds to do the Crooked Creek Interceptor project. So again, those are funds coming from another source. Also, we would have some ARPA funds to help pay for the 762 transmission main from the plant to the actual Wingate area. Those dollars are also baked in there. And then the board wanted us to say, well, what would it take if we wanted to expand the 12 Mile Creek plant to 9 MGD from where it is now, 7.5 to 9. And then what would it take if we wanted to continue with the short line extension program for 22 and 23. And so we had our folks go back and look at our rate model, look at our revenue sources and our funding, and see what it would take to do that. And we believe, based on that we can do those projects, and we can do the R&R projects that we've identified, not this $650 million worth of projects, This is not the R&R projects built into our budget. This is a completely separate issue. But based on R&R that we know that's built into our plan, based on doing 12 Mile Creek expansion, Crooked Creek interceptor, and the two years, 22 and 23, you could have a 1.75% increase for the next 3 years. Honestly, it needs to go a whole lot longer than 3 years, but what I would suggest is that we bake it for 3 years. We come back to the board. We say, hey, listen, this is working great. That still needs to be another 1.75, or, you know, it's not enough. It needs to be higher, or it needs to be lower. You're not going to be able to get away with a 1.75% increase for just 3 years to fund those things. I'm just suggesting that when you adopt this, you understand it's for a 3-year period, and then we'll come back to you. You'll decide, is there any changes that you need to make based on current conditions. That does not do anything with the $650 million worth of projects. I want to be very clear about that. So all of these pump improvements, the East Fork, the stuff to do with the water lines, that's not in this capital improvement plan, and that's not in a 1.75% rate increase. So
But in our system development fees.
the system
that's where
development
it
fees
can-
is also baked into that 1.75%. That's
Right.
correct.
And we do have the ability, if we start doing more projects, to increase that, especially our water, because it dropped to the highest.
So what you would have to do, obviously, is you'd have to do another study. We're allowed. You have to do it at a minimum every 5 years. Certainly, if the board made decisions that there are projects that you now want to include in a CIP that weren't originally in the system development fee study, you could ask that another study be done, have those
Specifically on
projects
water.
added in there, and then see what effect that has.
And we can do it specifically on water or specifically on sewer, correct?
It's my understanding you could segregate that out. It's already done that way anyway, but it's my understanding if you wanted to have it specific for water, you could evaluate it that way.
Because those would be for new homes. The
That's
Homes we
correct.
have here now have water.
That is correct, yes,
It's
sir.
the new homes that need more water.
It would be for new development, that's correct. So you can look at amending that system development fee, but you'd have to go through the process that we've already gone through. Obviously, you'll be adopting a system development fee ordinance in June as well. That is factored into that 1.75% increase, so that's in there. But I just want the board to understand that we are doing our best to try and get you what you're asking for, but there are some things that are really out of our control unless you decide that you want your capital plan to incorporate some of these things in there. And it's not an easy task. I get it. I understand it. Certainly, we can look at what it would take to fund some of these things, but I have no idea what you want us to see to fund. It's really about you giving me some input so I can go back and make those changes. I'm prepared to offer, and the board consider, at minimum 1.75% increase to handle those expansion projects and the short line extension, but it just doesn't get you any of the other stuff that's in there.
And that's what we talked about, and this is what we've asked you for. The 1.75% increase, Mr. Smith, who spoke earlier, that's what covers the project that he's talking about.
That's correct, yes, sir. It covered 22 and 23.
And so, and that's the existing homes, the homes that are already here. The,
Yes, sir.
any new homes built there would have to pay a system development fee.
That's correct.
So in with our repair, upgrades, things like that, we will be gaining new customers, but they'll be existing homes. So it won't be like we're trying to construct new homes on the backs of existing ratepayers.
That's my understanding, yes, sir.
Any questions other for Brian?
One of the things I would ask is does the board have any interest in any particular projects that we've gone over that you have concerns that you'd like to see us build into a potential rate model? And if the answer is none, that's fine. But are there any that you want us to focus on?
Anybody have anything specific they want to?
Well, obviously, there's still time. I mean, I'll do a budget presentation on June the 5th, and that budget presentation will have a 1.75% increase for the items that I talked about. If the board directs that they wish to see something different, then I'll obviously have to modify that and bring that for you to be able to adopt. It's a short turnaround. That's not quick for us to make those kinds of changes that quick. So if before then you have some input, please let me know. I'd like to be able to get you what you feel you're comfortable with. But I prepare at this point in time to submit a 1.75% rate increase to handle those items that I discussed earlier.
And Brian, I think through our earlier meetings, this is the direction that we have given you and said, you know, come up with what you need and what you can do. And I think that's what you have done. I think that we need to see what our sewer system development fee is going to generate. If it doesn't generate sufficient funds to do future sewer improvements, then, you know, maybe we look at the master plan. But this year, let's see what we come in, what we bring in. It was shocking to me. I think that last year we brought in $11 million increase instead of a normal $5 or $6 million increase. So almost twice the increase last year with system development fees. And if that holds true to this year, the year after that, and the year after that, then we can begin looking at some of these smaller projects for upgrades to make sure that we're not polluting the creeks, to make sure we're not overflowing the lines, and build that for the future. These new technologies that the first time I heard about was tonight. Thank you for telling us about those.
Sure. And I specifically asked Brown and Caldwell if they would evaluate that location that we have. I know there's challenges, but I needed to understand, and I needed the board to understand what can you do and what's realistic on that side.
Yeah, because in 20 years, we've only doubled the capacity of 12 Mile Creek, really. You know,
Certainly.
20 years ago, it was about 3 million gallons. Today, it's 6 million gallons that we're using there.
Right.
And we got 7.5 million now that we could use, and then we got 9 that we're going to, and then eventually we'll go to 12. So when I look at that plant, and then I look at the Crooked Creek plant, the lower Crooked Creek plant, I just can't help but asking myself, why would you design a plant that was going to fail in such a short period of time? And whether technology becomes available, like we're hearing that it has, and there's some options there, we always have the ability to purchase properties around that plant, and we have the ability to expand that plant if we can do that. And now I'm hearing more about it tonight. I'm really interested in hearing more. But that's not something, you know, I don't think this is the intention of the board to pop on up in July and say, okay, change everything we told you.
Certainly.
So I think how.
And I want to point something out to the board. You don't actually have to adopt a capital plan for water and sewer with the budget. It's easier that way, but you can actually go in and make changes to your capital plan at any point in time in the fiscal year, and then we can adjust rates based on that at any point in time in the fiscal year. The answer doesn't have to be tonight, and that's fine. That's why I say, is there anything in particular that you see that you have some interest of? We can always modify that at a later time.
And we've heard from state legislature maybe a potential of $20 million coming. You know, we can't count it until it's in our hands.
Sure.
But we've got there's other sources that are coming, so I think we need to plan those after we see what's coming from the state or any. I mean, who would have expected we'd have got $46 million from the federal government? So there's all kinds of things that are out there that we just need to take advantage of those opportunities when they come around. Anybody on the board against a 1.75% increase being included in the budget? You want to speak up to it now?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'm against it. We just had an excellent presentation from Brown and Caldwell on CIP projects that are meant to address problems that we are having right now and problems that we anticipate we could have in 2025. And a 1.75% increase doesn't even begin to address the problems that have been explained to us.
So how much would you like to raise the rate?
Well, you know, the prior board made a pretty good decision, and I pleaded with this board to take their time to understand what the constraints were and to understand what projects you wanted to fund before you rolled back the rates. But instead, you decided to roll back rates first and then give yourselves an education. That's not really a really good way of proceeding. You know, we have pressure problems now in the system. We have projects that we desperately need. The 880 and 821 transmission main, the 853 south transmission main, 672. As we were going through these list of projects, I noticed most of them, the vast majority of them, are on our halted list. They're on our halted list. They're on the list of projects that have been halted by the board. And they're not nice to have projects. They're must have projects. And we are stewards, we are governors of this system. And I think we're obliged to embrace a rate model, you know, that allows us to competently and satisfactorily manage the system. And 1.75% ain't it. And I'd also like to point out that the $652 million in costs that this represents, it doesn't include repair and replacement, as was pointed out. It doesn't include expansion at 12 Mile, which we know is a funding priority. And the alternatives that we went over in terms of Crooked Creek, the intensification technology option that seems to have attracted some interest, costs twice as much per million gallons a day as Site B. But this current board saw fit in their wisdom to have a 10-year lease on Site B and a contract with no termination provisions. What kind of sense does that make? None, this commissioner would say. But the short of it, what would I like to see? That was your question, what would I like to see? I'd like to see a rate model that competently and satisfactorily addresses the needs of our system. You know, and ideally, we plan for the needs of our system over a decade and a half, because the timelines on these projects are long. The ask here is pretty modest. It's, what do we do to make sure that we don't have real problems before the term of these three commissioners are up? So that would be my ask. I would ask that we embrace, again, a rate model that's more than 1.75%, I can tell you that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I think your rate model was about a 22% increase with 7% increases per year. The voters rejected that. We were very plain to the voters that of Union County. Mr. Smith said earlier, it seems like that there's a lot of concentration on sewer and little concentration on water. We need to make sure that we're not overgrowing in sewage, which allows that high density development that so many have complained about. So many elected officials have got elected saying they were against it, only to facilitate it more and more every year. And the people see their bills going up, the people see their rates going up, and people see a never-ending stream of problems. And with all these problems, you know, Manager, I'm not definitely blaming you. These problems have been going on a long time, a lot longer since you've been in charge or before you were here. But it seems like to me that maybe we need to get out of managing so many problems. And the way to do that is not build a Site B. Maybe let somebody in the future who comes up with a better technology decide if we need it. Maybe we use the new technologies that are becoming available every day to do something at the existing plant. But until we know where the money's coming from, until this year, we didn't know we could get a increased system development fee for sewer. And we did, and we're gonna find out next year how much money that adds to the pot. And if growth and development, new development, pays for itself, then I don't see the problem with development paying for itself. And neither do the people of Union County, because they spoke with a loud voice, electing the three of us, as you keep saying, to do what we're saying that we promised that we would do, and we're doing it. So the answer is, do we go your way and do more and more sewer, which is going to create more and more needs for water, which is going to create more and more needs to have lower, PSIs because so many houses are on it? Or do we fix these water problems as we go along? Do we fix the problems with the money that's coming in? Do we use the system development fees to help with those projects? Or are we going to try to build more $300 million water plants that require $300 million sewer plants, that require $300 million worth of upgrades to the system, that require $300 million of other stuff? And so the people said, nah, we're tired of that. We're tired of you promising one thing and doing another. So that's where we're at. And I think that we're managing very good in 6 months what took many, many years to destroy and to create these problems that you complain about today. The three of us have been in office together for 6 months. I don't think we created these issues. So any other comments on this?
Mr. Chair, I would just add that, I stood opposed to the rate increases, and I voted for the reduction of rates earlier in the year. I'd make that vote again because just my personal opinion is that the burden of growth shouldn't be put on the existing ratepayers. Now, if it involves us raising rates 1.75%, I would be amenable to that, considering the fact that we have reduced the rates at this point over 20% already. So, we have responsibilities that we have to fund. And so, Mr. Matthews, I would be amenable to you bringing that back to us. Let's look at the 1.75% and then go from there.
Certainly. If the board, one of the other items that I meant to bring up, and this is, I'm going to take a little liberty here. I believe that the board is supportive of an allocation policy and how we deal with our local jurisdictions, our municipalities on sewer. And so it is my recommendation, and I hope the board is supportive of this, that as part of an expansion to 12 Mile Creek, if you adopt the rates and fees associated with that expansion of 12 Mile Creek, that I will work with our municipalities, and I'll bring back to the board an allocation policy for how we distribute and have sewer capacity available for the county, unincorporated, as well as for municipalities. Ultimately, the decision is yours, and I will certainly work with them to come up with a solution that everyone can feel happy about, but there's going to be people that aren't going to be happy. And the truth is that we're just going to have to roll up our sleeves and figure that out. And as long as you are okay with that, that's the path I intend to take as an allocation policy.
And I'm in complete agreement with you. That's, this board, we've been pushing for a couple boards to get some type of allocation policy. Commissioner Williams championed that. And I would hope, David, that you still would.
Oh, I think we're all agreed on that one, for sure.
So the allocation policy that these smaller towns that are trying to be responsible in their growth management don't get pushed out of the way by the bigger towns that are approving stuff at rapid speeds. So yeah, I definitely think that's going to be part of the solution, and I'm in complete agreement with you there.
Okay.
What kind of actions do you need tonight?
Honestly, I just wanted to get feedback from you on the potential rate increase. I've not heard anything, honestly, that would prevent me from bringing that as part of my budget. And then the board can certainly consider any future capital decisions at a later time and what that may or may not have for rate adjustments at that point. But I've got what I need unless there's some other direction you want to give me.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the let's do this. Let's go take a little break. Let's take about 10 minutes and start back at what time is it exactly? Take a recess and start back at let's say 8:15. Bean. Next, we have the FY 2023 third quarter financial update with the always exciting Blake Hart. See you here.
Good evening, Chairman Rushing and members of the Board of County Commission. I only have 5 slides tonight, so we're going to be brief. It's been a heavy meeting, and this should be informative, but not too heavy. I wanted to share with you a projection I put together, a model for the end-of-year estimates for the general fund for the county. And we're going to talk about revenues and expenses, and then revenues over expenses, and where I estimate that the general fund will end at the end of the fiscal year in a surplus position. So this first slide is a brief review of our major revenues, and it gives you a few years of historical information. And I want to, if I can direct your attention to the table, the chart, the table at the top, to the right. The bottom of the table, where you'll see that as far as revenues, I'm expecting that we will collect $395.4 million in total revenues, and that represents 98.8% of the adopted budget that was adopted back in June. And if you go to the top of that table, you'll see the county's 2 major revenues, which is ad valorem and local option sales tax. And I'll drill down on those briefly in the subsequent 2 slides. But I want to give you an overview that our ad valorem collections are currently trending to 101%, possibly up to 102%. That means that we're expecting to collect above budget on ad valorem revenue. Sales tax is also trending higher than what was budgeted, and it's looking like it's going to trend towards collecting $7 million above the adopted budget, which is a positive. Union County, along with the rest of the state, has been very fortunate the past 3 years as far as sales tax collections. And that's where we are primarily. I want to point out one more thing. I'm not going to go through all the bullets, but I want to point out the bottom bullet around fund balance appropriated. When this budget was adopted, it included $12.8 million in appropriated fund balance. And based on the increases in ad valorem taxes and fees and local option sales tax, the $12.8 million in fund balance is not going to be required to be appropriated into the budget based on the increase of those other revenues. The next slide is a little more information around ad valorem revenue. The FY23 budget is currently trending above the adopted budget. Collections through March 31st represent 99.2% of the adopted budget, as compared to 96.2% in the prior year. The third quarter end of year projections indicates that we'll collect 101.8% of the budget, and that's being driven primarily by motor vehicle taxes collected through ad valorem, and also county population growth and inflation are pushing motor vehicle tax payments higher. When you consider that new vehicles cost on average close to 30% more today than they did 3 years ago before the pandemic, and that pushes prices up and causes our collections to increase as well. For sales tax, this table gives you information going back to 2019 for the county's adopted sales tax amount, revised if there was a revision, which we did revise in FY20 and 21. And in 23, the projected number where I believe that we're going to be at the end of this fiscal year. Just some highlights. The authority to tax online sales happened during FY21, and it coincided with the early stage of the pandemic, when people were home and were purchasing online primarily, and that's pushed online purchases more since then. And FY22 actuals are expected to exceed the budget by exceed prior year actuals by about $10 million. And I'm expecting that we will collect about $7 million above the adopted budget in FY23. And again, this is when you take this into account with historic inflation that influences collections, as the price of goods sold increases, the percentage and the proportional sales tax collected on those goods will also increase.
Blake, I think we need to dwell on this just a little bit.
Sure.
because this is incredible to me.
Yeah.
That, you know, you're not saying more than we got last year, $7 million. You're saying more than we predicted last year. And I know that last year you went up on your prediction, so you increased the prediction. We outperformed that.
We did.
So since 2019, we've gone from 45,818,000 to 74,686,000 in sales tax revenue. Now, the reason that's important is because for a very long time, we have encouraged people to shop Union County.
Yeah.
And it always seems like they wanted to go somewhere else and shop. But COVID brought that home. When you buy something online and it gets counted to Wingate, Marshville, Marvin, Weddington, Indian Trail, it doesn't matter where the store is. It gets credited to that zip code.
Mm-hmm.
So incredible numbers. It's not $7 million more. It's more like probably 14 million. You predicted $7 million more. We went to $14 million more.
It's each year for the past 3 years we have exceeded my predictions, and you know, as best practices in this role, it's good to be conservative.
Right, and I'm not, yeah, but even doing that, you said this year it's going to be higher.
Yeah, and
it used to be $1 million. I mean, back in 2023 or 2024, I think it's like $1 million, 1.2 million or something more than we predicted. Now it's $7 million more than being predicted, and again, that does go to our residents shopping at home, and thank them for doing that. But it is increasing now. Also, it's an increase in the inflation. When you go to the store and you buy something that costs 30% more, that's some of that. So it is on that note, it's kind of a bad thing. But to us, it is really helping offset some other burdens.
It is, and those are all great points. And if you think of it over a 3-year window, really of the pandemic era, if you look at the increases from FY19 to FY20, actual to actual, we increased 2.9 million, which is in a normal range of what historically we've received. And from 20 to 21, year over year, it was up to 7.5 million, which was incredible at the time. From 21 to 22 million was 10.1 million, which is, just off the charts. And 23, I'm projecting the end of this year, it'll be an increase of about 8.3 million. So it's, it stepped up during the first early parts of COVID, then ramped up in 22. It's still great. It's coming down a little bit, and we expect that trajectory to, to step off from there into FY24 too.
But is that more of a matter of you upgrading your projections? I would think that.
So that's actuals. So
okay.
No matter what I project, that's actual dollar to dollar.
Okay.
Yeah. And in each of the past 2 years, I've tried to be a little more growth oriented in those projections too, just because that's the way of the world right now. I will say too, in every month we get a distribution letter from the state, and it'll tell us broadly what the average is across statewide, the percent increase. And Union County is always above the average. So if it's a 3% increase from the year before statewide, Union County usually is 4 to 5% above that. So if you look at it as a distribution, we're very fortunate. We are always on the higher end of the distribution. And that's important going into FY24 in trying to be, balance, being realistic in what those projections should be, and still being, a bit conservative just in case. You know what I mean? That's what we're working with now. But those are all great points. Moving into expense, this is the expense model overall for the county general fund. You'll see that the budget number, the revised number was just over $400 million, and I'm projecting that at the end of this fiscal year we will have spent $389.2 million. That means that we will have spent 97.2% of the expense budget. That would mean that we would have not spent just over $11 million. And when you add those two together with the revenue and the expense, and you net that out, there'd be a net surplus of $6.2 million. So I'm projecting we're going to under collect revenue by about a percentage point and a little bit, and we're going to underspend by a little over 2 percentage points, and that'll net us positively about $6.2 million. And that's based on employee compensation, which is our largest internal expense. Typically yields between 3% and 4% annual savings. This year, our vacancy rate has been a little bit higher than it has been historically because of, the market, because of transitioning out of COVID and those types of things. So we're not spending quite at the same level as far as employee compensation, and recruitment is challenging too. Employee benefits typically in the year around 98.8%, because most of those expenses are front-loaded and are not dependent on the number of employees that we have on hand necessarily. Operating budget spending is within regular trends. There's a few areas that are under budget, and these first two areas of fuel and utilities, if you remember when we adopted this budget, we were entering the inflationary period and fuel prices were very high. Utilities were ramping way up, and so we made a decision to increase those budgets in the off chance. Well, hindsight's 2020, but at that point, fuel prices were really really increasing, and there was instability in the oil markets worldwide, and so we increased those budgets, and those prices have not come to bear in the way that we expected them to, and so there's some underspending there. But it's because the prices didn't spike like we expected them to for a sustained period of time. Also, the public assistance budget was increased in FY23 with the thoughts that if there were to be a pending recession, we would need to have funds available on hand for folks that may be displaced from a weakened economy or a weakened job market. Fortunately, that hasn't come to bear at this point. Also, some capital outlay, vehicles and equipment. We're still seeing effects of the logistical issues and having slowdowns in ordering new vehicles. And so some of those budgets will be carried forward into FY24 to make purchases next year just because of slowed processes that are just happening nationwide. Our contracts, grants, and subsidies, that's the line that we fund the schools out of, schools, EMS, SBCC, and business grant partners, and so those will be 100% expended. Also, debt service will be 100% expended, and interfund transfers as well. This is the final shot that shows revenue over expenses, and again, this is where you'll see that I'm projecting a total revenue collection of 98.8% and an expense of 97.2%. And you'll see at the bottom there in yellow that I'm expecting a surplus of $6.2 million, or about 1.6% of the total budget currently. Now, this is considering actuals through March 31st, so through the first 3 quarters of the year. If that's not going to be the exact number because things change, but there'll be some fluctuation. But I'm expecting. I believe that's a good estimate for where we will be. And for me, that's a very positive outlook, and I think that we've had a good year as far as the county budget.
What is a penny worth now? You still have that number, or do you have that number?
In FY23, it's 3.7 something. I don't have the exact number memorized, but it's 3.7 in a little bit. Maybe 3.79, 3.78, somewhere around there.
Any questions? All right.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, next, we have discussion of possible funding solution for the new county jail project. Last week, we heard from the sheriff of a need for a new jail, and in discussions with county manager and some of the staff, we were trying to figure out how what possibly ways can we fund this. And the staff had an idea of funding it, and the sheriff said that we might need to do it a little bit quicker. So with that, just wanted to see if the board had a interest in maybe putting on a bond project next year. That would be the earliest that we could do it for a jail. And then letting the staff bring that back to us of what that would look like. Any discussion on that or any ideas?
Have they found a place to build a jail?
So originally, the plan was to try and locate it on the site, and we're not convinced that it cannot be located on the site. As part of the scoping process, which that would be funded, we would evaluate that in more detail.
Mr. Matthews, how would that affect sewer capacity?
Is your mic on?
It is.
Okay.
And so obviously, they already have flow that are sent to the, I believe it's Monroe that treats that. Obviously, if we expand the jail, there's more flow that we'd have to accommodate. So we would have to come out of our $2.65 million gallons that we have. We do have capacity, so it would not necessarily affect us on that east side.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Williams? Good.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I would be in favor of moving pretty quickly in terms of funding a new jail. Our current jail was built because we came under court order, and we certainly don't want that to happen again. I don't think it's particularly a good idea to put it on a referendum because voters understandably aren't too keen on voting for tens or hundreds of millions of dollars for these kinds of projects to house prisoners. But I think to the extent we can accommodate funding through limited obligation bond funding, that's worth exploring, and the sooner we look at doing that, the better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right. So I would make the motion that we do direct staff to look into putting this on a bond referendum for next year. There's then the options would be we could either do it in a primary or in a general election. The general election would probably be the best place to put it to give it more people a voice in it. But that could be up to a later decision, I think. So any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Please correct me, General Counsel, if I'm wrong on this, or County Manager, if I'm wrong on this. But if this goes to a referendum on the ballot and fails, does that limit the county's flexibility in terms of funding a jail through a limited obligation funding or 2/3 funding?
So it's my understanding that it would create some complications for us. Obviously, the LGC would have to weigh in on how we structure that. It may be that the project would have to change in some degree. Instead of being a full jail at one time, it may have to be a phased approach, and we approach it that way. But there is the possibility that it could limit how we use limited obligation bonds to fund the project. You might not be able to fund the entire project with LOBs. You might have to fund a phase instead.
Well, I think that's a pretty significant problem, a pretty significant limitation if we put this before the voters and it fails. And, like I said, we have the current jail because we were under court order to build it. And we certainly should do everything we can to avoid a repeat of that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I completely understand that, Commissioner Williams, but I think that the point is that if we do go through a GO bond, the interest rates will be lower. It'll be less expensive, I guess, in the long term to build it as fast as possible. But our staff had recommended the incremental approach, and the sheriff didn't seem to be happy with the incremental approach. So to get the money at the best rate for the people, the taxpayers, as possible, that's the reason we're going with the GO bond. Now, if the GO bond does fail, then the incremental approach will be our option. And again, that's what our staff, they advised to do in the first place. So it gives us, this is a way of getting the money quicker, less expensive, getting it all up front, building it all at one time, And especially if we find out that we have to build it somewhere else, that's about going to be our option. And if we don't do something with this soon, I think the fact that we are moving forward and have a plan helps the court system or whoever would be concerned in trying to get us to build a new jail right away. That would help them understand that we are serious about it and that we are moving forward. Any other comments?
So at the presentation at our last meeting, it was a construction process, like 3 different phases, if my memory is correct, and the total was around $120 million. Is that phased approach different than what you were just speaking about?
No, ma'am. We would likely have to go back to that approach. However, the sheriff did express that if we were to do a phased approach, maybe we might do 1 and 2 together instead of just 1 by itself and then 2 at a later date. That still might be something that we would be able to get approval through with the LGC. We just haven't explored that at this point.
Okay, thank you.
And to be clear too, I mean, yes, the jail probably does need to be replaced at some point, but we are not at the point where we were previously under court order. So we are developing a plan. We do have cells that are usable while we enact a phased approach if we have to. So I'll be in support of the motion.
All right. No further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
1. Okay, next we have text amendment for the name Land Use Board as the planning board, also to perform different duties of the Board of Adjustment. So, Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board conducted a public hearing on this item at their last meeting. I think there was 1 speaker. I don't think she indicated that she was for or against as a member of the planning board. Essentially, what this does is, as you just said, it renames the planning board to the land use board and assigns the duties of the Board of Adjustment to that board. And it makes a number of other changes throughout the ordinance that are basically references. Where it talks about the planning board, it renames that land use board. Where it talks about Board of Adjustment, it renames that to the land use board as well. A couple of other items. There's an adopting ordinance that goes along with this, and I can pull any of this up if you want to see it. There's an adopting ordinance that goes along with this. That adopting ordinance will advance all the terms of the planning board and the Board of Adjustment. So those boards, the land use board would not be populated if this were to be approved. And the effective date would be set at June 5th. There is a Board of Adjustment meeting tomorrow that has some items on it. We would not want to impact that meeting because we do have some public business to take care of tomorrow night. That would also give us a little bit of time in the month of June to kind of get some training if there were new board members. I think Brian's got a statement.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So Lee, is it possible, and this, Jason, I'm sorry to ask this, but is it possible to change that effective date to a different date to be able to give more time for notice? Because obviously, I think the board would want to accept applications, make decisions on members for that, then you have to train. And in the time frame, you still want to have a board that operates. So can that be pushed to a later date and give time for notice and that stuff?
That would be fine with me, Jason. I assume the board would just need to modify the adopting language.
And again, the board can choose June 5th if that's what you want. I just wanted to make clear that if you want to give additional time, we certainly could push that date to a different time as long as that's okay.
If you desire a different date, we can work toward a different date.
July 1, would that be an acceptable date with all the
That'd be
items
fine.
you have coming up?
That'd be fine with me. We can work within whatever the board wants. The biggest thing is going to be on the board is going to be accepting applications and making appointments to that board. The quicker you do that, the quicker we can then set up some training sessions and get that done, because we'll have to train essentially one board to do the functions of both. So there'll be some training on what a planning board does, the legislative aspects, and how they make recommendations, and then the quasi-judicial nature of the Board of Adjustments.
So how many members on each board?
Currently, there are, including alternates, there are 9 members on the planning board, and there are 7 members on the Board of Adjustment.
Including alternates?
Yes.
Okay.
This would go to really a 7-member board.
Okay. Any questions for Lee or any comments? Okay. Anybody want to make a motion?
I might note that if you do desire to have that July 1 effective date, that you just include that in the motion. All the paperwork that we have prepared references June 5th, so we just need to be explicit about changing the effective date.
Okay, and I'm looking at this now, and I'm looking at the consistency statement. Is that where that date is? June 5th?
The date is actually on the ordinance.
It's in the resolution adopting the ordinance, and it may be in some other places as well. I've not thoroughly searched it sitting here, but just make reference that you intend to have that effective on July 1.
July 1, okay. Anybody want to make a motion?
I'll make the motion that we adopt an ordinance approving text amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance of Union County, North Carolina, and naming a land use board as the planning board, which will also perform the duties of a board of adjustments, text -2023-001, the ordinance, and adopt the consistency and reasonableness statement for approval to be effective July 1
2023.
of 2023.
Okay, that suffice. Okay, any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner Williams.
Thank you. I am against the motion. If you look at the 30 most populous counties in the state of North Carolina, there's only one other county that does it this way, that combines these boards. The best practice is to have a separate Board of Planning and Board of Adjustment, and for some very good reasons. One, the boards are quite different in their nature and how they operate. The Planning Board is a consultative board. It recommends changes to ordinances, county ordinances. And the Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial body. It swears in witnesses. Its decisions can be appealed to Superior Court. It has to be very particular and very fastidious about how it operates. And it's not a good idea, I think, to combine the boards and have the same board recommend changes to county ordinances and then also be in a position to interpret and make decisions on those county ordinances. That seems pretty backwards to me, especially for a county our size. Lastly, I think we may run into some problems in terms of volunteers with board service. I mean, service on each of these boards is significant volunteer service, but to expect the same volunteers to both act as a quasi-judicial body and also act as a consultative body is a pretty heavy lift. So for those reasons, Mr. Chairman, I am against the motion.
Any other comments? And I would say that, you know, this board has quasi-judicial duties, and we have the in-say and whatever. So, you know, I'm not as opposed to it, because over the years, I've watched, especially the planning board, not the Board of Adjustments, but the planning board be used as a political football from side to side. And I really do believe that our citizens that serve on the Board of Adjustments, with that additional training, they avoid a lot of the complications that can come from the planning board members. So I'm supportive of it. I've seen so many problems, again, over the years. And it just switches back and forth from time to time. And there are great members on both boards, so I would hope that all would apply for reappointment, and that we could find a good mix of people in this to do this. Also, the stipend is paid by the boards as part of this. And I don't know if we need to make that as part of this motion or an add-on, but we need to probably look at the stipend to those boards and maybe at that time raise it, because they will have some additional duties. And I think the Board of Adjustments meets kind of at will when they're needed.
That's correct, yes, sir.
And the Planning Board, they meet about monthly.
Board of Adjustment, yeah, yes, sir, you're right. The Board of Adjustment really meets when they have business. And same for the Planning Board, but Planning Board is usually a little more frequent.
Okay. And this would help or hurt your time?
I'm sorry?
Would this help or hurt your time? You attend every meeting, right?
I'm attending every meeting, yes, sir.
So, okay, so staff time, do you think it would help or hurt, or if you don't want to say, don't, just say plead the fifth?
Well, I mean, it would cut down one night meeting a month.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion?
I would just add that, in our prior conversations, council has explained to us too that the qualifications for these boards are very similar. So as I understand it, the qualifications for volunteers for these boards is going to be, again, very similar. And I've actually heard from folks on the boards that have expressed interest in serving should this new board be established. So I'll be in support of the motion.
All right. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
One. Okay. Next, we have funding for spay neuter services, item 23-304. We heard at our last meeting from several citizens that are concerned about animal services and the monies that we put toward that. At that time, I asked the staff to let us know we had funded a position in the last budget last year that was for a veterinarian assistant. And to date, that veterinarian assistant hasn't been hired. Looking at the number of animals that are currently being spayed and neutered at the Animal Services Office, I thought about, what could be done. And recently, the spay-neuter clinic, the low-cost spay-neuter clinic, has moved across the hospital, from the hospital on Franklin Street. And I've had some discussions with them asking, are they doing all they can? Are they doing the maximum amount of work that they can? Or if they had some additional resources to offset some of the costs. I said, how many people are coming in and saying, I can't afford it? And they said more people call, and then when they're told how much it is, they just don't hear back from them. They say they can't afford it. They had ideas like Feline Fridays or Feral Cat Fridays, where people can bring in feral cats and do spay neuters. And the money that we allocated, if we look at just part of that money, which is around $50,000, allocating those funds for a program where they can get reimbursed, anything and I would suggest that our staff work this out with them, because that would be a better, they know what legally can be done and can't be done. But I believe that we would get much more bang for our buck if we did it that way. And so, I would make the motion that we use that unused money that we funded last year in order to begin this program for $50,000 with the low-cost spay-neuter clinic. They got an office now that in their expansion that they're not really using a lot, and this would allow them to make the most of their expansion that they've done, and it would benefit the animal shelter due to lower number of animals coming in. A feral cat program. They do a program with pit bulls where they charge a lower rate for pit bulls, and they get donations. There may be some potential for them to get some matching grants from organizations. So just a lot of stuff out there that they could use this money for that would benefit the county. And since we didn't hire that position, I think that would be a good use of the money. Any discussion on that motion? the motion was to direct staff to work with the low-cost spay-neuter clinic to come up with a way to use that unused funding for the veterinarian assistant.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you. I would respectfully ask the board to table this item. The vet tech position is definitely needed by our new county vet. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have the public health director here who is his direct report, but my understanding is that we've been looking for candidates with a particular combination of skill sets, and that our current job classification system within the county is one that is proving difficult to accommodate that sort of candidate. So I don't know if it would be proper to invite the public health director to come up and maybe add some comments to this, but
Yeah, that would be. Dennis, will you come up? And Patrick, you.
Well, I just want to clarify that based on the direction I think I heard is we would be using lap salary, would not necessarily be taking the position away. So it would allow Dennis to begin to recruit for the position, but use the unallocated funds from this fiscal year to support the Humane Society effort. So if that's what I heard, it would allow Dennis to hire that position and us to give the money to the.
Well, one thing I would like to see is, since we have gone a whole year almost without it, is that we look at this program, the efficiency in it. While we're looking for a vet tech, they've got at least 2 veterinarians and vet techs already employed at the low-cost spay-neuter clinic. And if they've got an additional room, that's less room, because we've heard complaints about there not being enough space at the animal shelter. We heard a lot of complaints last week that I think, they don't have a lot of volunteers, I don't think, at the low-cost clinic. So they pay a lot of their people, but they could do probably 600 to 1,000 cats with this funding. And if they can show an efficient use in this, I would say that we fund it with the money from last year and see how it works in December maybe, and see if it's worked better before we hire the new position. And then, because the new position not only will require $50,000 of salary, it also require about probably $10,000–15,000 in benefits. So right now, what I've, Dennis, come on up. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stop you. What I heard is that they believe the pay's too low. I've heard that people believe the pay's too low.
Well, yeah, the issue, I think, has been Dr. Broadway was working on revising the job description, because one of the things we want the position to do is to also build a linkage with like the NC State veterinary program, to be able to assist in having some students come in and intern in, and we get some assistance from them. They're able to do spaying and neutering and surgical procedures for animals at the shelter. So it's going to be a pretty innovative program in that regard, and there's been communication with the state and NC State, and they're ready to move on that. That's one opportunity, and as we were looking at revising that job classification, it was right about the time too that the county was looking at doing the job classification comp and class study, which we're in right now. And so the decision was made that it would be, if we're going to do any kind of review, that it be pulled into that process. Well, then that process now is not going to, we're not going to really get information on that until probably fall at the earliest, I would guess. So in fact, we've recently made a decision, or close to making a decision, to go ahead and start recruiting for that position with the position we have right now. Obviously, if there's a change in course of action, we would have to reconsider that. But that was the reason for some of the delay in getting it.
Dennis, how many animals has Mr. Broadway, Dr. Broadway, spayed or neutered this year?
And Dennis, Jeff provided me with some of that information.
Okay.
So from April 1st of 2022 to December 31st of 2022, they did 431 at the shelter, and they had 131 on contract. So those are for animals that are either too sick or too young to get done at the shelter. They give them a voucher, they go to a local vet, and then we pay that local vet. So
Yeah, and
400.
that's kind of what we're looking at with this too, is that those vouchers that they're sending out from Animal Services, when we've adopted pets there, we've taken them, we took one to a veterinarian and we took one to the low-cost spay-neuter clinic. The voucher system could be a help. I mean, that would be it's not like you're just, and I would leave this up to the staff to work out with them. But it wouldn't be like you're just handing them $50,000, said, here, do what you want. It would be that voucher program that would actually, where Dr. Broadway's doing animals that are older at the shelter, this would be a complement to what he's doing there with those young kittens and young puppies that leave. And you would hope that they would get it, but it doesn't always cover the full cost. I think we pay about $50 currently on those vouchers, and that doesn't cover for canines, it's around 100 to 120. For cats, it may be about $60, I think, for the cats. And they did about 20, I can't remember, she was telling me in 6 months they did 2,500, or in a year they do 2,500, but they do quite a few. So that's where they're concentrating on it. If our goal is to spay and neuter more animals in Union County at a lower cost to the taxpayers and get these feral animals off the, out of the breeding production, those ideas that they have there, and the system and the organization and the phone number, the website that they already have, I think would complement and get a lot more bang for the buck, if that makes any sense. While I understand, we do have veterinary, people that assist the veterinarian, I'm sure, in what he does at the shelter. This would be a very good use of the money. I think, again, more bang for the buck. Yes,
So, there was a comment made that perhaps this wasn't filled because the pay was too low. And then you mentioned a partnership with NC State. And that's when I realized maybe the pay is too low, because there is, through the CTE program with Union County Public Schools, there is a 2-year certification for veterinarian techs at Porter Ridge High School, and I was just curious if you or Dr. Broadway had reached out to Porter Ridge to find out when their graduates finish their 2-year program, and many students are not choosing a 4-year degree or going off to college when they graduate high school, but if they have this 2-year degree, they would be interested if they're certified in veterinarian tech. Have you had those conversations with the CTE program, Brian Davis or Porter Ridge?
Yeah, I'm not sure specifically, but to your point about looking at the vet tech programs, because the position that we're looking for is a certified, trained vet tech kind of qualifications. And so we certainly would like to embrace that opportunity to, give exposure and also benefit from their assistance as well. So
I think that would be great, because I think the average pay for, a college graduate right now is around $54,000 a year. And, I'm not sure what the average pay would be for a high school graduate, but if we're investing in Union County Public School students that have this 2-year certification to be a veterinarian tech, I would really hope that we would reach out, to those programs and potentially recruit our own.
Yeah.
How many students are in those programs, you think?
I could, each program would be different, so we would have to reach out to Porter Ridge or Brian Davis to find out.
We can certainly follow up on that.
I would definitely reach out to them just from the learning experience. I've neutered 400 animals in a week. I've gave vasectomies to 300-pound animals I've done a hysterectomy on a 600-pound animal. You know, that experience that I learned through my years at NC State, through working for the second largest pork producer in the world, was, you know, valuable, and experience that these kids could get from working with Dr. Broadway. I mean, he could have, you know, some volunteer hours. These kids all need volunteer hours. That would be fantastic for them to go and help him. And instead of one, he might have 4 or 5 that would come in and help him at times.
Yeah, certainly Dr. Broadway is very open to the educational element. He sees this as a part of his function, also is serving to help educate in a lot of different ways, not just animal owners, but also folks who may be interested in veterinary type of work.
Yeah. So I would say that we would, let's go ahead, Commissioner Williams, if you wouldn't mind, let's go ahead and do the already allocated money tonight, and then relook at it in budget time and see if we want to continue with that program, or maybe give it till December. We can add it into the budget.
I would suggest, if the board is okay, that we use our lap salaries for this fiscal year. And then we essentially budget for this position for half a year. And you could certainly give direction in the half of a year of the fiscal year to say, yes, we're okay with moving forward with filling that position, or not, if you choose not to. And that's a possibility.
So motion would be to use the unallocated funds to provide for that program, and the staff to work out the details with the low-cost spay neuter clinic. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay, now we have the item that was taken off the consent agenda, item 23-240, is that right? Contract budget amendment, opioid abatement funding from Partners Behavioral Health Management. Commissioner Brian Helms, did you want this one off? You got a question for Dennis Joyner?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Dennis, thanks for staying late. So my question is not so much about the $81,000 that has been allocated for the medical supplies. You know, I think that we've well discussed the fact that Narcan has life-saving impact for use with especially like our sheriff's deputies or EMS and first responders or whatnot. I guess my concern is a couple of things. So first of all, and you can fact check me, please, but as I understand it, as of March 29th, 2023, the FDA approved Narcan in the amount of 4 milligrams for a nasal spray for over-the-counter non-prescription use. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
But now what we're talking about is a little bit different?
No, it would be nasal spray as well.
Okay. All right. So my concern then turns to the $10,000 in advertising. Now, there's been a lot of public outcry that we've seen on social media pages in the past when we've ran certain social media campaigns regarding, you know, get your Narcan, no questions asked kind of things. So, you know, I'm sure that the public will have a little something to say about this if we start running similar type advertisements on social media. And I'm sympathetic to that because you have a lot of folks out there that are diabetic and they have concerns about, you know, their own insulin and the cost for that. You have folks that require EpiPens that have bee allergies, and they have similar type concerns. The reason why I wanted to get this pulled for discussion is to air these concerns a little bit and talk with staff and sort of raise the issue that, you know, should we accept this item, which I fully anticipate that we will, and by the way, I am in support, but I think that we should be cautious with our advertisement. And I'd like to get a little bit more information about what our plans are for advertising this program.
Well, I appreciate your question and concerns, and the the path that we're headed down with, with these funds are primarily, as you said, it's for the naloxone purchase is the big amount. The advertising or the public awareness or is more of an education campaign, and we had to turn around pretty quickly on the use of the dollars because these things came available around April, and we, in terms of having access to the dollars. So one of our thoughts right now is not necessarily social media per se, but maybe a billboards or something to make people aware that, you know, the importance of substance abuse education and the importance of Narcan and naloxone, more of an educational standpoint. Now, granted, yes, there's going to be, you know, we do have it at the health department and we'll continue to have it because there's some folks who can't afford to go pay over $100, even though it's over the counter. There's some folks who may need access, and that's one of the goals that we're trying to use with this is to increase access to folks who may need it for their own individual situations. I don't know what those may be, but we hear about it all the time. But I hear your point about you know, being sensitive to what the messaging is and looks like. And we certainly can be cognizant of that as we work with public communications and in crafting what that messaging looks like. I don't have a design. I don't have a particular, you know, where that's going to head. Our big thing, we have to use the funds between now and the end of June, and so the runway's kind of short. So we're wanting to be able to at least have access to get it, because up to now, we've never budgeted for Narcan ourselves. We've gotten it from either some supply vendors or Cardinal. Actually, Cardinal, before Cardinal kind of dissolved, we got an allocation from them. So we've sort of been, you know, borrowing and getting where we can, the free Narcan that we've had. And then with these funds from partners, it is going to help us with that accessibility, because it is, I mean, it is a lifesaver, and unfortunately, it's much needed in the community. But I understand your point well taken about sensitivity to the messaging.
Yeah, and I understand your point as well, and I believe that we're on the same page here, that there is life-saving utility out of this drug, no doubt about it. I think that, again, we need to be careful regarding our messaging so that it doesn't appear as though we are strictly enabling, and we need to be sensitive of others as well. So,
and Dennis, I would say this, you know, and I think there's so many opportunities, especially with some of the drugs that are out there now. And this Narcan would be for what all overdoses? What all kinds of overdoses?
Well, Narcan is an opioid reversal medication, essentially. It is essentially benign for any other use that you would use it. If it's not, if a person is not having an opioid overdose,
fentanyl?
There's not going to be. Huh?
Fentanyl?
Oh, fentanyl is one of the main ones.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
which we hear so much about.
Yeah, fentanyl's
candy-shaped fentanyl.
Yeah, I mean that's the.
So what I see is that probably everybody nowadays maybe should have something there at the house for that, because you never know when your kid might pick up something and eat it, not knowing what it is, or get something from a friend that they don't know, and it's not going to hurt them if you found them passed out to spray the stuff in their nose.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So from that standpoint, if you were going to advertise it, that's the way I would advertise it. You know, I'd be very cautious about the first time, saves life, fantastic. Second time, you're replacing it. And in case it happens again, you've seen what it can do, like an EpiPen. Fourth time, fifth time, sixth time, people might be misusing it for the wrong reason to try to do something. So I do think that and I guess the program says no questions asked. Or?
Well, it's part of the issue is, you know, managing and understanding what a person's need and intentions are is difficult to know, whether it's for my son or daughter that has a problem or.
But I mean, you got a bigger problem if you've got if you're coming up there 5 times to get doses of Narcan, you got a problem you need to seek help for. You need to seek
Right.
legal help. You need to seek professional help. We've got psychiatrists that we put into the school system. We're still doing that half and half or something,
Yeah.
right?
And well, yes, in terms of in the school, you're talking about the collaborative?
Yeah, where we're working with the school system.
Right, yes.
That's all for a reason,
Mhm.
and it's not to enable somebody to do it 5 times. So I am concerned that if there's no accountability, that if that person's coming 5 times to get this stuff, that they're not misusing and they need help. They don't need Narcan, they need psychiatric or legal intervention.
Well, and I will say too that part of the role, and we, with the Narcan that we have had heretofore, we started this in 2018, and it's been slow. We don't have tons through that whole time frame. Walk-in folks who are coming over to the public health department, we've seen. I think we've had 48 in that whole time. It's not been a huge number.
Right.
What we've used it for is to assist others that are in venues where they may have the need. For example, not the animal shelter, the shelter, and different programs. Some of the treatment and recovery programs that they can need to have it on hand as well. It's becoming, to your point, much more needed to have it for multiple reasons. We don't see, I mean, and I don't think I'm wrong in saying this, where we have repeat offenders coming in
Okay.
we've only had 46 or 48 walk-ins over
Yeah, if
that
it's 5
period of
people,
time.
that's a problem. If it's 48 people, that's not a problem.
Well, I know, and there's a lot of concern about, what is too much or how often somebody may be using it. The unfortunate thing is with the fentanyl, the different opioid analogs that are there, it's so unpredictable, and it doesn't take but just one time
Right.
in some situations
And a
because
kid
you don't
can
know
pick it up by accident.
you don't necessarily know. I mean, we've had folks come in who they were getting it because their parent was actually on some pain medication, and they were concerned, about them if something happened and they wanted to have it available. So there's a wide variety of folks that can benefit. Hopefully they don't have to use, but they at least have it. And with the amount of drugs, particularly the fentanyl and opioid abuse that's in the community, part of our role is to try to, at least be a safety net for helping them in the event. Because yes, we want them to get treatment. We want them to get into therapy.
So that's part of it. They come in and you offer them treatment?
We're trying to connect them. We want to give them resources. We want to make sure that they, that they have a place that they can talk about it, and we can give referrals to folks who are, who can do more of the treatment and rehabilitation work that may be needed for those individuals. We don't do drug treatment at the health department, but we try to partner with community groups to make those linkages. And so that's sort of the angle that we take. We're trying to build the capacity in the community among a lot of these other partners. You'll probably be hearing more about this when you hear more about the opioid settlement funding and the use of that's going to be coming in probably in weeks to come. So this is all, sort of part of a broader effort to look at addressing it. Right now, this is just to help us to get some, fortunately, that we've not been able to have on this level to then assist these other partners in the community.
You ready to go home? Brian, make a
I
motion.
think y'all might be too. I haven't seen any of y'all yawn yet, but I've been looking.
I was yawning earlier.
It's been a long evening. Yeah, I'll make the motion. Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate the explanation, and again, for you staying late to talk about this. I'll make the motion that we accept or approve contract and budget amendment opioid abatement funding from Partners Behavioral Health Management.
All right, any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Okay, now we have county manager's comments.
I have none, thank you, sir.
Commissioner David Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go home too, so all I'll say is that for all the folks who've inquired about Commissioner Richard Helms, I'd just like you to know that he's continuing daily to grow in strength and in health, and I invite your continued prayers for him. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Brian Helms.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks again to the speakers that we had. I too thought that we were going to be having Miss Piedmont High School, so that was a surprise to me. So thank you to Judge Smith who spoke. Appreciate his comments this evening. Thank you to our staff too, because I mean you guys are keeping late hours with us, and we certainly know that and we appreciate that. I think that we've got some good stuff here with our consent agenda that we passed today, and I'm also anxious to see what we come back with from staff here in our next meeting with water and sewer as well. So with that, I'll end my comments and say thanks again.
All right, Vice Chair Melissa Merrill. No comment. And I will spare you all the gory details, no comments. Motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.